So I am super excited, guys. I'm in a good mood. Eddie, I don't know if you noticed, I put on just a small splash of cologne today because I'm feeling good and clean and crisp.
Hadn't noticed.
Huh?
Did not notice.
See, that's why. Just a small splash. I didn't want you to get a headache today.
Did you
Because
get your
Lord
parking
knows,
spot?
you having a headache is like a giraffe having a sore throat.
That's right. Did you get your parking spot today, by the way? It was open when I got in.
I went with my primary, not my backup.
Nice.
It's a Friday. Everybody else is gone. And it's nice outside. That's why I'm excited. It's a Friday. It's beautiful. The weekend is here. I think it's supposed to rain this weekend, but we're not going to talk about that. Like, life is good, right? Life is good. And the Pacers have not one, not two, but three new players, at least tentatively, after last night's round 2 of the NBA draft, more like yesterday afternoons. Question for you, Jimmy Cook, would be this. Are you surprised that the Pacers went with all 3 selections?
A little bit. With what we had talked about the last couple of days, it felt like it might not be in their best interests on a number of different avenues to make all 3 of those selections. That said, the way that the league is set up now, and it has been really the last couple of years as the G League has continued to grow, when you have those two-way deals and there's different levels of flexibility with second-round picks, it's not as impactful on your cap situation as, say, first-round selections would have been. And in terms of what the numbers say, what the backstory on all 3 of their selections are, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I have the ability of one of our routine members of the show in, say, Robin the Genie, and make a prediction to fully guarantee what's going to happen in any of these 3 players' careers. However, mapping out needs the Pacers had and what these 3 selections could do for them long term, I see a potential vision there. I'm not saying that each of those visions mean it's going to be high level success, but I get why they drafted the 3 that they did and where they could potentially see them being impactful pieces for the Pacers in the long term. But on your side, I felt like you were kind of in my boat where I thought maybe that as the week started, Jake, they could package those and potentially move into the late first, make a selection there. It was pretty clear as we got to about the midway point of the draft on Wednesday, that wasn't going to happen. They were going to wait till last night to do their bidding. But the idea of them making 3 selections, I felt like for both of us, we were kind of in the camp of, they probably won't take all 3, maybe 2, but I don't see them making all 3 selections. But do you see it that same way, that based on the background of each one of these players, you get why they could be some level flyer fit, some level real fit for what the Pacers are trying to add on to with an already established core?
I think here's the beauty of it. The Pacers, first off, are a unique franchise. And by the way, good afternoon to you on a Friday. My name is Jake Query. That was Jimmy Cook. You just heard from Eddie Garrison here as well. It's Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Before we get into the Pacers and lay out the show for you, let me say right now, Eddie Garrison, question for you.
Okay.
Do you ever, in particular in the wintertime, have a situation where all of a sudden you're like, there was a storm or something like that, and the power goes out at your house? And you're like, holy cow, the power's out. And then when the power's out, even though you have no electricity, like every 30 seconds you go into another room and you hit the light switch and you're like, oh, that's right, I forgot we have no electricity.
Perhaps.
Okay, it's happened to you. Jimmy Cook, you yourself, I don't know if I'm allowed to tip this behind the curtain, but I will for people. You drive an electric car, correct?
I do, yes.
Okay, so occasionally you've got to recharge it, whatever else. Maybe there is a situation where you think to yourself, I could use a little more electricity, right?
Yes, no doubt about that.
Right.
Yeah.
I would like for you guys to know, do we have the breaking news sounder, Eddie Garrison? Thank you. Last night I'm at dinner and sitting there and finishing up, and Shannon went to, go wash her hands or whatever, and I'm sitting there, and the guy next to me, because now there's a seat next to me vacated, because we always sit at the bar, by the way. When we go to dinner, we never sit at the restaurant, we sit at the bar itself. And the guy that would have been sitting to her left, now there's an open space between us, looks over and says, and I quote, "Hey, Jake, I'm part of the company." And I said, "Really?" And what do you do? So the breaking news sounder is we now have an official electrician of the company.
Wow.
Fantastic.
DJ is the official electrician of Query
Wonderful.
Company. We'd like to welcome him aboard.
Fantastic.
We do onboarding next week, as a matter of fact.
Talk
where
about a power surge. Big
our
time.
non-existent HR department will meet with him and make sure that we have everything. It is a power surge,
Yeah,
isn't
indeed.
it?
Yeah.
So we now have an official electrician. So I have a jolt of energy, not just because we have DJ, the official electrician of the show, on board, but also because not one, not two, but three Pacer players on board. The draft is complete, and this is what I love. This is what I absolutely love. Let me throw to you guys a few names to cement my point, okay? William Njoku. Either one of you guys familiar with William Njoku?
I think I read his novel last month.
Okay. Point taken, right?
Yeah.
Jacque Walls. Jacque Walls. Either one of you guys familiar with him?
This is a Key and Peele skit.
That's right. Urazam Lorbek. Urazam Lorbek.
Nothing.
Bueller. These guys were all second-round picks of the Indiana Pacers that were basically flyers. And you look at it and you say, Jake, what is the relevance of that today? Why are you telling me these names today? I'll tell you why. Because those names were selected in years where the Pacers were coming off of fabulous seasons. Those guys were selected in years where the Pacers were coming off an Eastern Conference Finals run or a trip to the NBA Finals, and where their roster was such that their second-round pick, you don't even remember the guys that they took, because that's a sign that your team is in a direction and has a security. That's no knock on any of those guys. And I'm not saying that they were taken just as a throwaway. But when you have second-round picks that, and you say to yourself, well, this guy's never going to play, usually that's a good sign. It's because your team is really good and your roster is set, and you can afford the luxury of taking a guy and just kind of seeing whether or not they pan out. They've had that situation as well, right? I mean, Cassius Stanley was a guy they took in the second round, and it didn't work out. But he was the 54th pick. You know, what are you going to do, right? Andrew Nembhard, 31st pick, second round. Actually, he was a second-round pick. So my point being, the fact that Enrique Freeman, Tristan Newman, guys that might be able to help them, and then obviously the fact that their second-round pick, which was kind of their first-round pick, if you will, and I know that they made the trade. Johnny Furphy, technically, the selection. I know they took Juan Munoz, and he's actually on their website, which is funny, but that's going to be Furphy. But
thank goodness as well that they had Munoz in studio so that he could put on the Pacers hat. I thought you'd get a kick out of that, Jake, when they're still giving out the old hats.
You have like an obsession with this, right?
It drives me nuts, man. And I'm not the only one. A couple people, like prominent NBA writers or just sports fans in general, the last 2 days on Twitter were like, why the NFL clearly does it right. Why are we having this moment that is cemented for this kid forever and the franchise forever, and it's the wrong hat?
Yeah, so that you can forever post pictures of Kawhi Leonard in a Pacer hat. Yeah. But my point being this, circuitously, is the Pacers, kudos to them, have put themselves in position to make draft picks that you can take a flyer on. When you look at, Furphy's an Australian from Melbourne, by the way, and if we can get him in studio, Eddie will let you work on that when he comes in and he officially joins the Pacers. We've got Tim Tams and, Shapes crackers that we can share with him. Vegemite, he can come in and have Vegemite. We've got it all from our folks in Melbourne. Our friends in Melbourne can supply us, right? But that's his hometown, Melbourne, Australia. International player, a 6'8" player that is only 19 years old and has a lot of growing to do. But the Pacers have put themselves in position where they have the roster to allow the flexibility of that growth, where they can kind of draft and stash a guy and let him, if he develops and now suddenly they have a 6'8" wing scorer that can shoot from the outside and be a consistent shooter, then great. They don't need they were not in a situation going into last night where they're like, they need a guy right now that can crack the starting lineup and score for them. They definitely have needs. I'm very intrigued by Freeman because he reminds me of Alize Johnson in terms of situation. Johnson was a guy that, and Oscar Tshiebwe is kind of in this category as well, has kind of the niche of just being maybe an undersized rebounder, if you will, but a dog kind of in that mentality, and also can score. But coming from, Akron's not exactly an NBA factory, but nonetheless a decent league. And why not take a chance there and see if you have diamond in the rough potential? If it works out, fabulous. If not, they are not in desperate need right now of they could use a compliment in that area. We've talked about that, but you get what I'm saying. And then the same for Newman from Connecticut. My point being, Jimmy, I like the fact, and I think that we should celebrate the fact that the Pacers are in position more quickly than we thought of being able to simply go with, hey, we got a couple of pieces that look like, they're worth taking an exploration on and seeing if something works out for us to add us some depth a year or two down the road.
This is the springboard effect that gives the Pacers the luxury of being able to map out just that. When you are a team that, A, made a trade mid-season to go acquire somebody that you felt like would be more impactful to your team in both the short term and the long term than a first-round selection in a weak draft class would be. Of course, they get that with Pascal Siakam, and by all accounts, it's just a signature away here in a couple days from that being solidified for this first extended era, if you will, underneath Tyrese Halliburton. So you're armed then with second-round picks of how do you adapt the roster? How do you look at we talked about this yesterday in regards to Memphis and Zach Edey, or with the Miami Heat and Khalil Ware. You're looking at selections and you're trying to figure out how they fit into the puzzle and how does the picture look as you step back and try to envision how things look a season or 2 or 3 from now. Freeman has drawn comparisons from, I've seen, and 3 out of the 4 are good. One is like, well, he didn't really survive as long as you'd like him to in the NBA, but I've seen Kevin Knox, I've seen Herbert Jones, just won Defensive Player of the Year, or not Defensive Player of the Year, was an all-defensive first team this past year. I've seen Draymond Green, I've seen Obi Toppin, that there's flashes of all 4 of those players within his game at spurts because he's such a good rebounder, and there's some versatility within the trenches to his game. Still a lot of areas of weakness that needs improvement upon, but rebounding as a whole, you knew that was an area the Pacers want to address in the long term. That was something that they were often exposed against during that playoff run to the conference finals, most notably against New York, and then you saw it in stretches against Milwaukee. You're going to try to plan where the overall backcourt and the backup to that backcourt looks in 3, 4, 5 years. It's not to say this is going to be exactly what Tristan Newton is, but he fits the profile right now of somebody that could be a backup point guard within the National Basketball Association, or a backup 2 guard in the National Basketball Association. And then in regards to Furphy, the 3-point shooting percentage alone, like even if he is just, and I saw this comp, Jake, a couple of different places, if we're saying the Pacers are on the same plane as the rest of the contenders in the East, which I do believe they are. I believe they are in that same contender category. They should be viewed just as much of a threat as Boston, even though they just won the title, as Milwaukee, as Philadelphia, as New York. I think they belong in that same class. A lot of people liken Furphy to what Sam Hauser has been for the Celtics, which is a good team defender, but is also a high-level shooter from beyond the arc, can space the floor within a rotation. That's not to say it's guaranteed that's what all these pieces are going to be, but when you're looking at Flyers, it's not just about, oh, let's just throw a dart and see what this thing's going to be. It's how does that particular Flyer fit within what our team needs and what this player could develop to be. And there's no doubt with those 3 selections, again, you're not going to be overly critical of a second-round pick unless they're just being absolutely crazy with what they're doing. As long as you see fit with it and you see an opportunity to grow and develop a player that's expectations are going to be outside of Furphy pretty minimal, I thought that they nailed what they wanted out of an off-season draft where you're coming off a conference finals, where you believe you're in the same breath as the contenders in the East, and you know the specific needs that you needed to try to address with the assets you have, which in this case were second-round picks. I have no problem with any of the logic they used. And if things pan out on those Flyers, as you mentioned, Jake, Freeman could be an elite rebounder for this team. You could see Newton be a valuable rotation piece for this team, and you could see Furphy be a rotation piece that leads to good team defense and three-point shooting if he's able to develop that way.
This from Casey, by the way. Hey, Jake, as somebody that watches every second of Jayhawk basketball, Furphy was an absolute steal. He has a ton of potential, and he absolutely plays his tail off. Okay? I'll take that. You know, I mean,
that's enough for me for a 36th pick.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not like he was mocked in the second round.
And
he
his
was
age, right? I mean,
right. And he was projected. You never know, right? It was such a wide open draft. You had no idea what was going to happen, but he was projected to be just outside or right on the cusp of the lottery. So where they got him from a value standpoint, if you look at that, it's tremendous. Like that's a great find for them. And he's still very young, whereas the other two are more older prospects. The kind word to say about that would be more NBA ready prospect. That's what you often say, another buzzword there for older players, as we joked about the other day. But yeah, with Furphy, anybody that you talk to that's watched him play will say the same thing that texter wrote in about, which that he does work his tail off, and he is an asset to have on the perimeter if that's your scheme offensively, which no doubt is something the Pacers want to continue to thrive at.
Now, let me address the other elephant in the room from last night that I think most people thought was a very high possibility. There's been discussion for quite some time, probably starting as far back as a year ago, that this is how things are going to play out. People were like, I'm telling you, like, this is what's going to happen. And then there was like, no, I don't think it'll happen that way. We shall see. And there was some people seemed excited about the possibility of it all coming to fruition in a certain way. Others were lukewarm about it. And then you're like, I don't know. Is that really going to take place? Is that really what's going to happen? And then lo and behold, even if you didn't tune in to see it happen before your very eyes, you were well aware of what took place because you got a text about it, or you saw it on X, or you saw the reaction, and you saw the firestorm and everything else. And, okay, what does this mean moving forward in terms of, is this in fact somebody that is going to be around for a long time, or is this somebody that was, now there's going to have to be a change made? And we knew going in to yesterday that, in fact, all of this was a distinct possibility. And then it happens, according to some, exactly as they anticipated. And what I'm talking about, of course, as the elephant in the room, is the fact that, yes, Bronny James went to the Los Angeles Lakers with the 55th pick in the draft. Now, for whatever reason, there are some people that are really upset about this. And like I had someone say to me, they're like, this was rigged from the get-go. ESPN, the NBA, they're all guilty of framing it this way and setting it up. And I'll be honest with you. I am hereby ready to declare on this, the 28th day of June at 18 minutes after the hour of 12 o'clock Eastern Time in Indianapolis. I, Jake Query, am ready to, right here on Query & Company, with DJ, our new electrician of the show, and Jimmy Cook and Eddie Garrison standing by as witness, I am ready to declare that I have zero problem with that. We are in sports, and I am myself guilty of this. This is the beauty of sport. The beauty of sport is it is the one area of life where we are expected to, and on an hour-by-hour basis, the biggest hypocrites in the world. If it involves our team, our players, our city, we're all for it. If it involves the rival, we can't stand it. I'll give you an example. In 1994, the NBA draft was held at the Hoosier Dome / RCA Dome in Indianapolis, Indiana. The number one overall pick, Glenn Robinson out of Purdue. The Indiana Pacers, who were coming off of an Eastern Conference Finals appearance and getting set for a another Eastern Conference Finals run against the Orlando Magic and had broken through and were suddenly like the talk of the NBA. The Indiana Pacers had 3 picks in that draft. Okay? They selected Eric Piatkowski, who they immediately traded. I believe that was part of the Mark Jackson trade. They drafted the aforementioned William Joku, who was Canadian, and I don't think ever broke the roster. And then they're sitting there at pick 44. And they're sitting there at pick 44 in the second round of the draft, and there's 40,000 people in the Hoosier Dome. And the Pacers are sitting there, and everybody knows whoever gets selected here, it's the 3rd pick of the night for the Eastern Conference finalists. They have Reggie Miller. They have Dale Davis. They have Rick Smits. They're acquiring Mark Jackson. So everybody knows in the building they don't really have any pieces they need at this point. But there's a kid from Indiana that everybody in the state of Indiana loves, and he's a hero ever since he was in a season on the brink when he was in the 7th grade, and Bob Knight said he was better than any guard at Indiana. Not potentially right now, he said to John Fines. Now, the crowd starts chanting, Damon Bailey, Damon Bailey, and they're going crazy. And look, I love Damon Bailey. I love his story. I know his place in Indiana basketball. I know how good he was as a college player, underrated as a college player, a very versatile player for Indiana. 2 bad knees. But the reality is everybody probably knew if you put him on a lie detector test, Damon Bailey was not going to be an NBA player. Not only because of his size, but also because his knees at that point had given way. But nonetheless, the boy legend, the legendary story of the state of Indiana, literally the Clark Kent of basketball in the state of Indiana, the boy wonder Damon Bailey, is available to be drafted, and the hometown Indiana Pacers, who have just recently cemented this marriage with the fan base of Indiana, as now transitioning it from a high school town to a college town, now to an NBA town. In the NBA draft in Indiana, David Stern gets up and says, with the 44th pick in the 1994 NBA draft, the Indiana Pacers select Damon Bailey from the University of Indiana, and the crowd goes bonkers. That's right. That's exactly what they start chanting. The whole place, right? And the reason why Damon Bailey was selected was entirely because of sentimentality and because it's the 44th pick and whatever else, right? The entire reason. I think the Pacers were doing him a solid because they knew that he needed knee surgery, and he was able to get that in his rookie year. But this is a guy that never suited up for him. But everybody loved the story of it. Bronny James is a small, undersized 6'1" guard that probably is not an NBA player. But in Damon Bailey's case, there were aspects or angles as to why it was worth taking the flyer and taking the pick on him there and burning the pick. And in the case of the Los Angeles Lakers, it's the 55th pick. Like, I saw people like, everybody knew, like, this was orchestrated by the NBA that he's going to go to the Lakers. And I'm like, what? So 54 picks ahead of time, they were like, gosh, we really want to take Bronny James. It wasn't like people were lining up for his services. I understand why you take Bronny James for 3 reasons. Number one, because of the sentiment. We knew for 3 years ago, LeBron James said, I'd like to play with my kid. Number two, and yes, there are aspects from a health standpoint where I think where Bronny James, I mean, I understand the concern from that standpoint, but I don't think people that think he shouldn't be in the league are talking about that. There's a natural resentment because of the feeling of nepotism that goes with it, and I understand that. But it's the 55th pick. It's not like he's going to be on that roster for 10 years. But secondly, even though he's undersized, and even though, yes, he didn't necessarily crack the starting rotation and become a contributing massive player for USC, the reality is this. The only thing that we know definitively about him, the only thing definitively that we know about him is the fact that Bronny James is the son of the most versatilely skilled basketball player in the history of the game. And somebody who, from a physical standpoint, is a generational anomaly. And he's a young guy, so is he going to, in some way, shape, or form, develop or grow into 10% of what his dad was? I have no idea. Maybe. And in that case, it's probably worth a flyer equal of some of the players that are taken 56th or 57th, right? Who cares? Why are people so up in arms about it? I don't understand why people are upset by it. Who cares? I mean, we love the fact that Ken Griffey and Ken Griffey Jr. played on the same team for like a season in Seattle, right? It was a great story. Who cares?
I think I'm with you. I don't care. It does not bother me one way or the other. It was an inconsequential pick at the end of the day. It's one of the last picks in the draft. For me, I think the reason that people care is that, and it's the nature of when you've reached the very pinnacle of the sport time and time again, and you've been as polarizing of an athlete to be around long enough to reach that status.
You're right.
It's the polarization of LeBron James and the media feeding into it because they know it'll get engagement, because they know that it'll get reaction, it'll get clicks, and people will be up in arms over something that at the end of the day really has no real bearing on the average sports fan or the average person on the planet.
Look,
It's weird outrage that is just...
Jimmy, somebody sends me this. One interesting note. Rich Paul is Bronny's agent and reportedly told teams interested before 55, Bronny will not report to your team and will go play in Australia. Guess what? They didn't care.
And also,
that's my point. It's not like people were like, oh, no, we'll do anything we can to get him to play here. They didn't care.
And also, they could have done that. Like you're telling me, and we have proof on the NFL side because it happened most documentedly in my lifetime with Eli Manning. We've seen it happen once before. You're telling me that agents have not told teams in the past, look, hey, do not take this guy?
Do you know who else did that? This is the thing. Like when people talk about Jerry West, for example, the late, great Jerry West, rest his soul. When Jerry West passed away, everybody's like, this is the guy that had the foresight to draft Kobe Bryant as a teenager. That's because Kobe Bryant's agent told the Indiana Pacers, the Hornets, other teams, he's not going to play for
Didn't Elway do it?
Elway was a little bit different because Elway simply told the Baltimore Colts, I don't want to play for you because your franchise is in disarray. He
it happened last year
else.
with Trace Jackson Davis. Like his agent was going around telling people that he didn't really want a two-way deal. He wanted a guaranteed 4-year contract.
Trace Jackson Davis is a good example.
Just because Bob Myers and the incompetent group outside of Malika Andrews that are running things over on NBA's pregame, halftime, postgame, and otherwise, ridiculous draft show is sharing to the world that I'm hearing reports that Rich Paul is telling people not to draft Bronny James and he's threatened to go to Australia. Okay, that if you think that type of posturing by agents doesn't happen across the board in sports, you're lying to yourself.
But my point being this, it's not like he was in demand.
Sure.
That's like, why are people up? You know what I mean? It's not like people were lining up to try to draft Bronny James. Everybody knew what was going to happen. Yeah. Everybody knew that. Is it weird and hokey? Yeah, maybe. Sure. Great. Is it orchestrated like the first father-son combo to play in the NBA together? I mean, it's a little bit different than if it was, I'm trying to think of two, like a father-son combo that were both very, very, very good players. But again, I mean, is it hokey and orchestrated?
Gary Payton and his son.
Yeah,
Payton would have had to play much longer if that
that's
happened.
The thing. I mean, you have to have been a good enough player that you're allowed to play for 20-plus years. It's incredible what LeBron James has done, right?
Yeah.
Chad Buchanan this morning talked with the guys from the morning show, talking about the wake-up call with KB and Andy. Had some very interesting things to say. Interesting enough that they are worth hearing a second time because we're getting, well, for many of you, it might be the first. If you're like me and you slept in, then you go back, you listen in podcast form, and you think, I want to hear that again.
Go to the podcast center on 1075thefan.com sometimes, I mean,
you can do exactly that because you're going to hear him for the first time if you didn't hear him earlier now, and then you go back and you listen to the podcast for either the second or third time. Because Buchanan had very interesting comments about the build of the Pacers roster and a couple of things that I thought were very interesting in terms of precedent. You hear me talk about precedent? I think Chad Buchanan tipped his hand a little bit on where precedent with the Pacers franchise came into play of strategy this year. I'll explain all that, and you'll hear it in his words next. yesterday the Indiana Pacers had 3 selections, and they went ahead and stuck with them. We talked about that. Johnny Furphy, who I'm going to call Johnny Murphy probably. Is there a famous person named Johnny Murphy? I just keep, for whatever reason, naturally I want to say Johnny Murphy. It sounds like it would be Murphy and not Furphy, right? Furphy sounds weird. Wasn't there an HBO Real Sex about people that were called Furfies? For some reason, I'm thinking that. I don't know. What's that, Eddie?
I was going to say it was a famous John Murphy, but he was an American baseball player who was a pitcher in the 30s and 40s.
Won 7 World Series with the Yankees.
I was going to leave that part out, but okay.
Now, Jimmy, did you know that before you looked it up?
No, he says he's relief ace. I had no idea. Yeah.
I realized that, I don't know how fast the Yankees bandwagon was moving when you jumped on it one day, but
it's hilarious.
Yeah,
anyway, relief pitcher in the 30s. No, I was not aware of John Murphy. Murphy, excuse me.
Then they take Enrique Freeman out of Akron, Tristan Newman out of Connecticut.
Newton.
What's that?
Newton. Like Sir Isaac Newton.
Tristan Newton. What did I say?
Newman.
Hello, Newman.
This isn't Seinfeld.
I do like Seinfeld. Tristan Newton, who's a good player for Connecticut, but Connecticut's hard to tell because they had, how many players did they have drafted, right? And it's funny because Danny Hurley with Connecticut, the whole kind of selling point of what Connecticut did last year was, man, they don't have any like major superstars, but they had a lot of players drafted. I mean, they obviously have a lot of talent, and he develops it for certain. But my point being, the Pacers are in a situation where they have the pieces. It's literally like did you guys ever do Legos?
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So you get like the Lego, and now it's a big thing. You're going to get Legos and do like the Millennium Falcon, whatever. And you put it together and you get everything done with it. And then you can go and buy the auxiliary little pieces that go on there, and you're like, oh, this is cool. It's a little flag that goes on top or whatever else that aren't part of the original kit. That's kind of where the Pacers are. The project itself, the big assignment, they've finished it, and it looks like on the box they got done faster than they thought they were going to. But the product of what is on the box is done. Now it's a matter of buying the little auxiliary pieces to accentuate, for the most part, the big project. And that's what they're doing, and they're seeing if some of them stick and some of them may not. But let's begin with Chad Buchanan this morning when he was on the wake-up call with KB and Andy, talking about that original design of what's on the box. One of the key pieces of that was and has been Obi Toppin. Obi Toppin that was acquired and from New York, and I thought played really well. And you could probably make the case that Obi Toppin exceeded expectation. And I've said this a lot about pro sports. Oftentimes, it's not with a player. You don't necessarily assess them based on their original. It goes by how they were acquired, or in terms of their current locale. In other words, Obi Toppin being acquired for, I think it was a pair of second-round picks, if I'm not mistaken, that from New York, and then you put him in the roster, he was tremendous. He was durable for them. He played in, I think he appeared in every game. When he would come off the bench, at times he was instant offense. He provided some good interior defense in moments. He had a much better shot than I think he showed in New York. And he played as they expected with Tyrese Halliburton, above the rim, which allowed the Pacers to kind of further cement the new style that they wanted to play. One of the real important things that Obi Toppin did, if Indiana, over the life of Tyrese Halliburton's new contract, is expecting that Halliburton's style of play is going to, in fact, recruit players to come here, Obi Toppin was a huge part of being able to showcase that to people of, look how much fun this is. Look at this guy running the floor and doing way above the rim, fantastic dunks and getting on SportsCenter top plays and the crowd coming to their feet and everything else. Toppin was a poster child for what the Pacers envision for who and what they can be. But aside from that, he was very consistent in the playoffs. He had very good games. Good player for them. But they are in a situation now where they have made him a restricted free agent. That means that, in fact, other teams can make an offer to him, but Indiana has the ability to match. The question for Chad Buchanan was that the guys asked, Chad Buchanan, please Enlighten us. The qualifying offer that you extended to Obi Toppin, the fact that he's now a restricted free agent, is this because you simply want to force somebody else to pay more for him, or in fact, do you have design to keep him in-house? Chad Buchanan, what say you?
Well, Obi's obviously a guy we want to retain. He had a great season. Teams around the league, obviously, they watch every single player, intensely all season long. And, figuring out does he fit with the way, that team wants to play is, always what you're factoring in when you make a decision to pursue a player. But, I'm sure there's going to be competition for him. He's a good player. He's entering the prime of his career. He's a good guy. He's durable. So, but we want to do everything we can to keep him, and hopeful that we can.
Now, here's the thing. If, in fact, they keep him, and yes, you have the flexibility with the new draft picks, because you look at it and you go, well, if you're running it back with Obi Toppin and have your roster intact, then what happens in terms of the players that you just acquired, whether it be Furphy, whether it be, Freeman, whether it be Newton-Newman, and that's going to be his name from here forward. You have the two-way contracts, and you have some room to move there in terms of what you want to do. That doesn't mean that all three of those guys are going to be on the bench for every game, is what I'm getting at. But Chad Buchanan said something I thought very interesting when he was asked about whether or not, and you hear this a lot in sports. Remember Anthony Leal said it with IU, we're going to run it back. Y'all just need to chill. Yeah, Indiana's running it back, but they're adding like 9 new faces, right? That's not really running it back. The Pacers, though, running it back. And by that I mean trying to use as much of the core piece roster that just broke through for them, got to the finals of the in-season tournament, got to the Eastern Conference Finals, won not one but 2 playoff series. Now trying to get everybody healthy, back on the same page, together. That's the definition of running it back. And in talking about doing that, Chad Buchanan, I thought, mentioned something that comes to precedent of franchise. Here's Buchanan this morning.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at right now. I think that was the intention all along. Once the season ended, as we watched this team in the playoffs, we saw how much they enjoy playing with each other, how they complement each other. The fit with Coach Carlisle's philosophy was there. And, we got a lot of young guys that are still developing. I think it's easy to think that, hey, this is your team, this is what you're going to be next year. And you hope that you have the same chemistry, which I think we will if we bring this group back. But we have young players that are still maturing, and, hopefully the playoff experience helps some of those guys take another bump. And, keeping Pascal here moving forward is important to us. So having him for a full training camp is going to be great for us, and getting Tyrese back healthy. So we feel like this group, there's still upside and growth left to it. And when you have a good locker room and guys enjoy playing with each other and they have defined roles, you're very, very careful to not want to disrupt that, because one move can really alter that and really have drastic impact on your team.
Okay, here's the thing. Precedent. I think something was said there that is extremely enlightening. Larry Bird was a very good executive for the Pacers. He was an excellent head coach, because I think Larry Bird, coming off of his playing experience, knew the relationship between player and coach and how that dynamic works. But as an executive, while Larry Bird was very good, he was good. There are a couple of areas where I think he erred in the draft, but I think that he knew players in general, but at times he erred in not understanding the evolution of player and team association and relationship versus when he played. And I'm thinking about when he said with Paul George, Paul don't make the decisions around here. Paul George did make the decision. He then went and said, okay, then I don't want to play power forward, so I'm going to ask to be traded. You didn't build enough around me, I'm going to ask to be traded. Where I'm going with that is the following. The Pacers had very good teams that Larry Bird was the president of. That is kudos and credit to Larry Bird. But on 2 different occasions, I think Larry Bird underrated and underthought chemistry of a team and how important it was. Because Bird played in an era where it was, in fact, a little bit different in terms of just dynamics of guys meshing together, tough love, etc. There are two moves that took place under Larry Bird's tutelage of running the franchise where they were humming along. They were humming along. And I'll never forget Charles Barkley saying on TNT the night that the trade was announced, when the Pacers acquired Evan Turner, it was like, it's over. Give the Pacers the East. They are going to win the East. This guy is the final piece, whatever else. And what Evan Turner, not saying he's a bad guy. I don't know Evan Turner. All I know about him is that he drove like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini and ran out of gas on 465. But when Evan Turner came here, it clearly disrupted the chemistry of the roster. It just did. And all of a sudden, it was oil into water, and it just did not mix, and it disrupted the Pacers' chemistry, and one move hurt them. And then you had the group with Hibbert and David West and Lance Stevenson and that group. And with that particular team, and I know that there are the rumors of like, oh, I'm telling you, like it turned out that, one player was dating another player's wife and, a million different rumors around town. But the thing that I'm not saying that this was the independent sole culprit here, but a big thing that happened with that group was late in the year, the Pacers won the free agency sweepstakes to bring in Andrew Bynum. And that was going to be a huge move. Andrew Bynum, what a huge signing this is going to be. Andrew Bynum, guy that, the Lakers, Andrew Bynum, huge piece. And Andrew Bynum came in, and he had one good game, but he completely disrupted not only the chemistry of the team, but more so the fragility of the security of Roy Hibbert. And it absolutely disrupted Roy Hibbert in his headspace, unlike anything else, and it derailed that season for the rest of the year. Those are two different examples of where, in Chad Buchanan's words, one move disrupted the franchise. Now, Larry Bird is not still running the Pacers, but he is still a consultant and is actively around the team and in spurts. In other words, very well liked, well respected, and certainly still a part of the family is what I'm getting at. There is no question in my mind that in the discussions, not the mandates, but in the discussions, the free-flowing discussions between Rick Carlisle and Kevin Pritchard and Ryan Carr and Chad Buchanan and Kelly and that Larry Bird is also brought into those conversations. And there's no doubt that precedent comes into play where they say, we as a franchise know for a fact that late moves to an already good locker room, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Jimmy, kudos to the Indiana Pacers in the fact that they have a roster right now that isn't broken and doesn't really need fixing. It just needs time.
Yeah, the only thing that needed finalizing with the roster was retaining a core piece, which was Pascal Siakam, and we wondered how that would come about and what the cost would be and the years would be on that. And they found level footing to the point that you now have, at minimum, two core pieces that you feel you can build around for the next 3 to 4 seasons at minimum. And we know, of course, that Tyrese Halliburton is still incredibly young. And if you're mapping out the franchise that way, you would still, in theory, have another 10 years or so if he has a fully healthy career, maybe even more than that, to build around him. But this is the first real championship window iteration of what the Pacers are trying to build. Once they locked him down in Pascal Siakam, and you knew the team control they had for all the other pieces, everything else really doesn't need a major shakeup. Like, yes, there's still needs, and I'm not saying that if, for example, regardless of the Obi Toppin situation, and I do believe that Chad Buchanan has every intention of bringing him back, from a rotation standpoint, it would be hard not to want his veteran presence at this stage, given who would be filling the void of his role if they were not to retain him. But if they don't have that change or that next gear arrive that they wanted to with Benedict Mathurin, that they feel like Benedict Mathurin's going to bring this season, Jake, if that's not there, you can always explore at the deadline. You can always explore at any point in time next season before the deadline of making a tweak or making an adjustment, But going into this draft and going into this free agency period, you are, if you're the Pacers, viewing your roster as a luxury situation where the foundation is solid, and now it's all about, to again play off of your analogies, it's all about decorating the house now, getting a couple things to accent your foundation, your home that you've established here. That's what they did with their second-round selections. They would be able to solidify that to some extent. I don't think it's a negative bringing back Obi because he still has attractive qualities, even if for some reason you want to move off of a deal from him in a year or two. I don't know why you would, but if you do, he is still an attractive prospect around the NBA. And again, if you take him off the board, that is a void now to the continuity of the roster. It's a void to that second unit and the bench. It's a void in minutes distribution that currently, unless Jarris Walker was to take a leap forward and you're playing him at Obi's spot, which he might, you don't have a guy to fill that void. You need to retain Obi. Unless you get, monopoly money, then I understand. That's life in the NBA.
Last year, the Pacers took a young player in the first round of the draft. We did not see a lot of him in year one. What does Chad Buchanan see for him in year two? We will let you know that. And Dustin
Dopirak.
Thank you. Joins us coming up top of the hour. First song of the 80s, this song from Starship, but it does include a traffic report right in the middle of it, which is pretty cool, right? Like all of a sudden in the middle of the song, they were like, you know what we should do? Like they had a meeting one time. I don't know if like doobies were involved, but they were sitting around and they're like, you know what'd be awesome? Is if we could just record a guy doing a traffic report in San Francisco and work that into the song. That'd be totally badass. And they're like, all right, let's do it.
Would the equivalent today be somebody saying, "Hey, we should have somebody do a TikTok live stream, but audio only"? Like, is that what
pretty much
the modern day equivalent is?
I don't know how much doobs are involved in that, but yes. So the Pacers last night, as we talked about, 3 picks, none of them in the first round. Last year, of course, and this is a sign that you are improving. You're no longer drafting in the lottery. Last year in the lottery, the Pacers took Jarris Walker. I think everybody knows that, out of Houston, young player. And we didn't see a lot of Jarris Walker. As a matter of fact, the first number of occasions that he got on the floor, I thought he looked like, and I've said this before, really bad comparison perhaps, but when I was a freshman playing open gym with the varsity in high school, and by myself, isolated, I was a good shooter. I could do a lot of different things, but like the game was moving so much faster than what I anticipated, and I was always like overthinking it, and my feet were moving faster than my hands and my dribble and whatever else, and I would turn the ball over, throw it out of bounds. I'd get nervous. And Jarris Walker, truthfully, looked kind of like that to me in his first probably half dozen appearances in the NBA. He just looked like he was rushed, or he just needed to slow down and kind of ease his way into things. The Pacers are still adamant that in their belief in him. You know, I've been told, like this year, for example, there wasn't a whole lot of desire to move into the first half of the first round because they felt like Jarris Walker was better than any of the players they would get in the first 10 picks this year, perhaps. And so, therefore, if he was a piece people were interested in, there was no sense in moving him because they already had that on the roster. And they know who he is, and they like him as a person and presumably as a player. I do think they still believe in him. But Chad Buchanan this morning on the future of last year's first-round pick.
Jarris has had a really, really strong couple weeks here. He's been in our gym twice a day, working with Jim Boylan and our coaching staff on developing a more forceful game. We've challenged him to utilize the physical gift that he's been given, to play with force, to attack the rim, to be a disruptive defender. You know, everybody wants to score points, which is great, and Jarris has that ability. But we score points already at a high level. We need guys that can defend, that can rebound, that can, make plays, that, do a lot of things that maybe add up in the box score rather than just one column. And I think Jarris is focused on having a great summer league and catapulting that into training camp and having a great second year for us.
Now, in terms of the player that is going to be the new Jarris Walker, and by that I mean next year a guy that presumably is going to be on the roster and a young player that, again, just a year removed from what we would know as in high school, even though growing up in Australia, in Melbourne, Johnny Furphy was a guy that came over, played at the University of Kansas for a year, developed late in the season where he shot just under 30%, I think it was, from three-point range, but at 6'8", lean, is a multi-skilled player, but really hasn't grown into his body or his game just yet. But Chad Buchanan, on talking to the Kansas head coach Bill Self, who has seen his fair share of NBA players under his tutelage, Bill Self's comments to Chad Buchanan about the Pacers' new acquisition, Johnny Furphy.
Coach Self is very brutally honest about his guys. He values, basketball IQ, which is something I think Coach Carlisle really values. He values toughness, hard-playing guys that are about the team, and he checked all those boxes. Coach Self is, will tell you he's got work to do. He's a young player who needs to get stronger physically. He's got to learn the NBA game. He's got to continue working on his skills, but there's a lot of raw talent and raw ability and IQ to work with, which we thought were a great long-term fit with us, with where we're at with our roster right now.
That's the thing that a lot of people say about this program. I don't know about the long-term part, but a lot of IQ, right?
Across the board. By the way, to your Jarris Walker comments and Chad Buchanan's observations on Jarris Walker's rookie season, this is not an uncommon move. You see it all the time with first-year players, but on the wake-up call with KB and Andy, he also shared that Jarris Walker was going to be a part of the Summer League roster out in Las Vegas. I mean, that's just another opportunity to showcase, to gel, to get a feel for high-level basketball, even if it's not the NBA at its highest form. It is other rookies, other second and third year players that are fighting to navigate through their development process. So he'll be featured out there in Vegas. You would assume that the entire rookie class for the Pacers, including Furphy, Newton, and Freeman, will all three be featured out there for the rookie class, and then whatever the rest of the makeup is. But an interesting point there from Buchanan that was in the longer form of that conversation, that you're going to see Walker out in Las Vegas.
Lot more to talk about with the Pacers and just the draft in general. And a guy that will be covering all of it in the upcoming season and covered it last night, Dustin
Dopirak,
joins us next. Lot to talk about in the association. Joining us now on the CarX Tire and Auto guest line, of course, you read his work covering the Pacers for the Indianapolis Star, talking about Dustin
Dopirak.
And he is fresh back from his vacation. Dustin, for the first 8 minutes of this conversation, we're going to talk specifically about Barcelona.
I figured, yeah.
You just got back when? A week ago?
Saturday.
Okay.
And last Saturday, basically. Saturday night, I think.
I try not to be that guy because there's nothing worse, right, than when you're going somewhere and people are like, oh, gosh, you got to go to this restaurant. And you're like, oh, look, I kind of have it mapped out here, right? But you did hit, I think you hit 2 places that now that you and I have been in common, correct?
Yes, at least. I think Salts was a great idea. Just fantastic. I mean, tell everybody about that place. It was phenomenal. One, it was just, it's very basic, just that you order beer from a counter, and then you get to look out at just the most gorgeous, landscape you've ever seen.
And that is, for those,
it was phenomenal.
Well, for those that aren't familiar, the 92 Olympic Games were in Barcelona, the Summer Olympic Games in 92. The Dream Team played in Barcelona in 92. They were off-site. They were like 45 minutes outside of Barcelona. But the swimming and diving venue, was purposely kind of built at the top of this mountain so that as the divers were diving, the camera angles would capture in the background the entire landscape and skyline of the city of Barcelona. And that area now is basically just like almost a snack bar where you can sit at a bar top and you're probably there for 30, 45 minutes, but you can see out over the entire city. I told you to go there, and you were adventurous enough to do exactly that, and I'm glad that it worked out because it is a cool view for sure. And then
it was, and there's there's other stuff going on up there. We went to there's a castle at the top of that mountain. So you can basically take it's called a funicular. If you've ever been to Pittsburgh, it's like the incline. But there on top of that, you can take like cable cars further up, and there's this sort of like castle thing. They kind of you can sort of see over the sea. So we spent a lot of time on that mountain. And you can still sit in the stands. So basically, you can sit at a bar top, but you can go get a drink in the stands. We were there on the night of the solstice. They have a lot of people just fire off fireworks, basically. Like, it's the longest day of the year, obviously. And so you could sort of sit there and, as day turns to night, you see just basically everybody sort of shooting off fireworks. There was a big sort of a pretty significant crowd of people just sitting in stands waiting for that. And we kind of caught a little bit of that. We walked around up there. There's also the Olympic Stadium is about maybe a mile away, somewhere in that vicinity. We were there actually between Springsteen shows. Basically, he played there, I think. We were there Friday night, and I think he played Thursday, Saturday. So it was a really, like, that set us up for a really cool scene. Going there as a centerpiece got us to see that part of the city that we hadn't seen yet.
Very cool. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the trip. Let's talk about what happened last night for the Pacers. Any surprise to you in terms of the way that they approached and or executed the draft of 24?
It was sort of a surprise, obviously, that Johnny Furphy was still on the board. So I certainly saw his name in the late 20s. Obviously a guy with a good bit of upside. As a shooter, Australian kid, obviously 6'9", 202 pounds, a lot of room for growth, basically. It was interesting that he was on the board, and obviously the Pacers seemed to have, set their sights mostly on more experienced guys. I think they looked at it as, all right, whoever you're going to bring in is going to have a hard time getting on the floor, so you might want somebody that's going to be ready to plug and play, when eventualities happen, injuries, trades, any kind of thing that leads to some shakeup in the rotation. And that's kind of who they focused on. I think they got 36 guys in for workouts. 30 of them were, college players, and I think 29 of those had been 3-year starters, at least. And so, ended up going with the freshman being a little bit different, but it was like, obviously you didn't expect him to be on the board. He was a guy they really liked, a guy that they think his upside really fits with what they like. So just basically having Chad Buchanan explain it, he was like, well, we figured this guy was a first-round grade. We were pleasantly surprised to see him around, and that didn't necessarily fit with what we were looking for, but we like his game. We think he fits him. I thought one stat that really stood out to me, he shot 80% at the rim, and 75% of those were assisted. So that tells you he's really good at moving without the ball, cutting, getting himself in position to get buckets that way, get easy ones. And he shot it pretty well. He's got, I think, a lot more potential than what he showed. I think he hit 44 threes at 35.2%, but I think they sort of see a lot more capacity for him to be a really good outside shooter. So like that was kind of against the grain for what they seem to be looking at, but you also kind of figured when a guy like that's still on the board, you're not going to pass him up. And I also thought it was a little bit interesting, a touch surprising, realizing that they made the last two picks and got guys that were sort of more of experienced guys that you look at and say, well, he might be able to actually help you. And it seems like they might be willing to, just carve out two-way openings for those guys. That means, maybe an Isaiah Wong and Quentin Jackson are probably in trouble. But they're going to try to find a way to make openings to get all those guys on the floor. I thought Tristan Newton was really the kind of archetype of what they were looking for. A guy who's a winner, has been, been really important for multiple teams, and obviously has got two national championship rings, an MOP trophy, and was a consensus first team All-American. Guy can do so many things for you. Play multiple positions. So the last two kind of fit what they were looking for, but I just thought it was interesting that they made all the picks, went after guys that they weren't trying to stash or something like that, or try to sell the pick just to not have to make it. I think they went after guys, used all three picks on people that they use and that they like.
Dustin Dopirak is our guest, covers the Pacers for the Indy Star. Dustin, there's no set guideline for a player has to be drafted here to be able to be a starter. Like, you don't have to be a first-round pick or a second-round pick to show value, obviously, to be in a starting role, or for that matter, just to be in a rotation piece of being a high contributor right away. In a draft that was so clouded with who's going to be good, who's going to be a bust, where is the volatility between picks 5 to pick 25, like with all those type of uncertain questions around this entire class, when you see a guy as young as Furphy is fall the way that he did, because he was invited, and you covered this, I believe, in your story on the Star, he was invited to the green room because he was projected to be around the first round, be a first-round selection. He winds up being an early second-round pick instead, but because of that free fall and knowing that there were projections for him of being a first-round talent in this draft, does that impact at all his age versus what he could do immediately, at least from some analysts, dictating whether or not he's spending time in the G League right away or whether or not he can earn himself a rotation spot in the immediate future?
I mean, I think I don't know that all those factors work into it. I think you just look at. I mean, the way Chad Buchanan talked about it was like, well, we're going to have to be patient with him and give him some time to develop. And I don't think he meant that in a sense of we're going to give him a rotation spot and let him sink or swim. I mean, obviously, you're talking about a team that was just in the Eastern Conference.
Do you think he's talking more like Jarris Walker-esque in that regard of easing him into the process?
Oh yeah, definitely, and probably even more so. I mean, they just used their lottery pick, and who was obviously a lot more physically developed, and had him spend most of his time, a lot of his time in the G League. So there's probably not going to be more openings. It's not going to be easier to get time on the floor. It's going to be harder, if anything, going into the season, especially if they keep some of these guys. I mean, even if they let some, Obi walk or something like that, if somebody makes an offer to him as a restricted free agent that they don't want to match, again, Walker's there to kind of step in. Like whoever they could lose at this point, it's really just Obi Toppin and Jalen Smith. They have somebody else for those guys. They have Walker in Toppin's case, and they have Isaiah Jackson obviously and Jalen Smith. And so there's not a clear opening. There's even less. When they got Walker, it's like, okay, well, is it going to be, Toppin or Walker starting? Is Walker going to be a backup guy? And it ended up not being that at all, but that's kind of what we were thinking last July. So there's even less of a clear path for Furphy. Now, that doesn't mean he won't be able to play at all, but I do think that they're thinking development with him. I think they're obviously thinking physical development, but there certainly could be opportunities for him to step in and make some shots. But I think they will, look for whatever possible to get him some G League work, even if they can't get him on an actual two-way. They will do what they did, with Ben Shepherd and with Jarris Walker last year, and I think just convince them that, hey, this is going to be good for you. There's value to this, and they'll certainly have players, including Walker, including Shepherd, and including Pascal Siakam, that will be able to say, hey, go down there, make the most of it. Don't treat it like it's, like you're being banished or whatever. You're going to get to play down there, enjoy it, have fun with it, improve yourself. So I imagine that's what they're going to do a lot of. I mean, I'm not saying he'll have zero opportunity. I do think they could use some movement shooting. I just don't know that he's going to be ready for all the other things he's going to be asked to do. My thought is that he'll probably have a pretty substantial amount of G League games, especially in the first half of the season.
Dustin Dopirak is our guest from the Indianapolis Star. He's on the CarX Tire and Auto guest line. He's also relieved that I just said his name correctly for the first time in the history of this program. Dustin
Dopirak.
Thank you. When I look at the three players that the Pacers selected last night. Johnny Furphy, as we know, probably somebody that the skill set is there, time is probably needed. And then Freeman and Newton. It's interesting because all of them have something about them that makes them intriguing, and you can kind of sell yourself on how there's a spot for them. But the reality is, as Chad Buchanan talked about, they're running it back with this roster. They don't need a lot of interruption to it, maybe a little bit of accentuation. Let's go to the bottom of the roster in terms of those players that will not be here next year that make room for if, in fact, they want to try to retain all three of these guys, or what is the future in terms of how they massage the back end and the two-way deals to get all three of these guys, if so desired, opportunity to become contributing members going forward?
Yeah, I mean, if they had nothing in free agency, if they don't go get somebody, because they're over the cap, they still have access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which would allow them to play someone somewhere. I think up to $12.8 million is about how high you can go. So obviously, when you're getting into those guys that are sort of 20 million types, they can't go that high. So maybe if there's somebody out there that they feel like they could get, it makes it a little bit more difficult if they really see something they like. But you have to imagine that they're probably not bringing back Doug McDermott. Certainly they're certainly not bringing back $14 million. So that is one roster opening. Obviously, you have the consistently curious case of James Johnson and whether they could, decide to keep bringing him back. He earned his money last year in the playoffs just by a couple times, like when things were getting a little bit.
Just chirping at Bobby Portis, right?
What's that? Yeah,
just chirping at Bobby Portis, right?
Stood up, looked them straight in the eye, and basically that was the end of it. James, all he has to do is walk on the court every once in a while, and he has served his purpose. It's just like you understand that you can't mess with the rest of these guys because James Johnson's on that bench. And so that's worth a couple million a year. And so it's like, are they going to continue to do that? Are they going to keep him around? Again, obviously on several occasions they've had the opportunity to let him go or not bring him back, and they keep bringing him back. So, I presume that is still an important thing that they would like to do, is keep that guy around when they can. So we'll see what happens with that. McDermott's, I think, the guy that they can leave. I think there's, I think they have to make a decision on Kendall Brown, and I'm not exactly sure what all goes into that one because obviously he can get a full-time guaranteed contract until about halfway through this season. And so, I think that there's some issues there. But, I think they obviously can, just let two-way guys walk. And so I think Isaiah Wong and Quentin Jackson are probably in trouble. I don't know if they're going to want to move on from Oscar Tshiebwe yet, especially as productive of a season he had in the G League. The flip side of it is it's there are certain scenarios where he can't really defend it. I went and watched the playoff game. They got beat by the Delaware Bluecoats, and they only played like 10 minutes because they were playing all wings, and they just couldn't trust him to defend out there. So it's going to be interesting to see if they maintain him. Tshiebwe was at the facility last night. He was literally getting treatment while we were there. So I don't know if they're ready to move on from him, but if you presume that there's two-way deals, they can make sure that they've got, I would presume Newton and Freeman on, and then you sort of have them there as taxi squad guys when necessary. I presume the McDermott position will open up, and again, you don't know if another one will. Obviously, Jalen Smith has his player option that he could certainly decline. Obi Toppin's going to be a restricted free agent. They certainly have to make an offer to bring him on. So a few things could shake out that lead to there being, more than one opening. But if they let McDermott walk and you use two of the three two-way contracts, you can get Furphy on there, and then you can get Newton and Freeman.
Dustin, is there a number or a ballpark range from those that you've talked to with Obi Toppin now being a restricted free agent that if a team sent this range of money towards him, the Pacers would be uncomfortable matching that? Or are they at a point in this quote-unquote run-it-back tour where because of the bird rights, because of the way the cap operates, even if they might wind up getting close to the luxury, depending on the amount of money there, that they're willing to bring him back at all costs? Where's the talk at this stage?
Nobody's talk. I'm not going to act like I've got like an inside source saying what their number is. I have a guess, more so than I have sort of specific intel on this, telling me what Chad Buchanan or Kevin Pritchard or any of those guys are comfortable with. I just have a hard time imagining that you go up to 20. That seems sort of way too high. I think you'd probably one of the better ways of looking at it is, kind of to imagine Bruce Brown. And I think Bruce was more capped for Denver in terms of what they were allowed to spend based on where else they were in the salary cap. At that point, I think he might have been unrestricted, but it was more or less.
He was, but yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think there were specific reasons, like Denver could not go over a certain number, and the Pacers I don't think are in a position where they can't. But I mean, I would just have a hard time. If there's somebody out there that needs to throw money at somebody to get to a salary floor, I don't think that the Pacers are going to want to, going to go all the way up and match that. But I do think, the 10, 12 million range, I think is got to be doable.
How big of a void would that be if he is removed based on what they drafted and based on what they would potentially use on a mid-level exception? If it's not a sign and trade, if it's just a straight offer sheet they didn't match, how big of a hole is that to readjust and fill? And how much of that honestly goes on a player like a Jarris Walker stepping up and being a real commodity that they want him to be?
Yeah, sure. You've got players who can take the minutes and do something else with them. It's just the specific kind of weapon that Obi is and how he fits what the Pacers want to do. I mean, that's significant. Like if you put Walker there, you have a different skill set, and it's good. I mean, like they obviously, there's a reason they didn't trade him. There's a reason that they sing his praises whenever given the opportunity, even though he hasn't played. There's a lot of nice little things he can do. I mean, I think when you really get to watch him in a Mad Ants game, when he gets opportunities and gets the ball in his hand, obviously you're watching a lower level of basketball, but you're still seeing a skill set that you don't see from a lot of guys his size. I mean, he can bring the ball up. You saw him like running point guard in the garbage minutes that he was out there because he's got that kind of vision and that kind of feel for the game. And he got to be a much better shooter over the course of last year. I mean, dramatically better. From where he was when the season began to where he was when the season ended. I mean, that's a huge jump that he made in terms of the frequency of making three-pointers and even mid-range stuff. But it's just Obi is just such a weapon on transition. I mean, he's just one of the fastest forwards in the league, and his ability to just reliably finish at the rim in transition or even in the half court is important, especially when the way that they operate. I mean, just having a guy who does not need the ball in his hand very much, who's really good at moving without the ball, obviously is really good at creating scoring opportunities by just breaking as soon as you get the ball in your hand and beating your guy down the floor and getting buckets out of that is a big deal. It's not easily replicable. There are certain, obviously some guys out there that can do it, but Obi's one of the best there is. And so to truly have a high-level skill, and he obviously shot the ball really well from outside as well. I think it's 40.3% from three. So it's a weapon with the way that they play offense, but as fast as they play, having a guy that when you throw the ball down court and he's there, that's 2 points. That it's a sure bet. And that basically, again, like Halliburton basically played like quarterback tight end with him, just throwing the ball over people and say, Obi's going to get it. I trust it. That's a valuable commodity to have. It's a significant loss. Again, if they get, putting Walker in there, he's going to have his own skill set. He's going to be able to bring things to the table that Obi doesn't have. He certainly has more capacity, I think, as a defender. I don't think you saw that come together yet. I think he's going to be a good defensive player. Or Obi's certainly been shaky on that end. But again, I think that weapon you lose in terms of what he can do in transition is significant.
Dustin, it's been attributed to Mark Twain, I think erroneously over the years. But the quote, "I never argue with a man who buys ink by the barrel," was allegedly originally said by later a governor for Indiana, who, when he was running for office, said that quote. It ran in the Indianapolis News like back in the 60s. Roger Brannigan initially apparently said that quote, which basically means that people in the newspaper business got tons of power that they can wield. Now, you're in the newspaper business. You're with the Star, not the News. They were sister companies at one time. So here's my question. I need your help, even though you're not buying ink by the barrel, but rather you're buying internet space by the kilowatt, whatever. So here's the deal, by the megabyte.
Right.
The Mad Ants, you mentioned the Mad Ants, and we've mentioned this before. I'm on a huge mission for this, okay? The Mad Ants, now that they're going to be the Indiana Mad Ants, and they're playing in Fort Wayne, and they were called the Mad Ants because of Mad Anthony Hatter in Fort Wayne, and that doesn't, or Mad Anthony Wayne, and that doesn't apply anymore. So
Sure.
If they're going to change the name, I believe that they need to be known as the Indiana Slicks, as a double meaning for the Slicks, meaning racing tires at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and Slick Leonard, who saved the Pacers. Now, I don't have much authority to do that kind of thing because I have a microphone and not the ink. Can you start running with this and then credit me like every third time you mention it?
I'm on board with it. I'll credit you every time you mention it because I didn't come up with that. I like this idea.
I have a logo. The logo where it says Slicks, okay? The C is actually an in motion going to the right tire, but the left hand of the tire is darkened, and that's the C itself, C of the tire, because you have a slick tire, but it's in motion, it's fast, it's sexy, it's fun. It's like Slick Leonard was, for that matter. And then you also have, I mean, this is the kind of stuff, to be honest with you, where sometimes I think I'm wasting my time with this dog and pony show, and I need to get into politics and PR, right? Which they might ask me to do next week. We have no idea. But what do you think?
Yeah.
So are you on board with this?
I'm on board with this. Yeah, no, I'll give you all this credit for this. This is a heck of an idea. I mean, I've been sitting there waiting for something to come, not come to me, but like, not that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this, but I don't really know what it should be. And to your point, like, it can't be the Mad Ants anymore, because it's just that's such a Fort Wayne connection that it almost sort of continues to kick Fort Wayne in the face that you kind of stole the franchise. But I do think, I think that's a good idea. I think playing with the playing with the IndyCar idea is always a good one, and giving homage to Slick Leonard, I think, is a great idea.
Now,
as well.
and I'm not even looking for. Listen, I've already trademarked Why Not Indiana, so I don't need any more of my brilliance to be lucrative for me.
Fair.
But for example, when you're having dinner with your wife and you say, I had a really good idea that I heard today, and you run past her the Slicks thing, the first thing she's going to say is, that must be the guy that told you about the bar in Barcelona, because that guy's a good idea factory.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Because you don't come up with your own ideas that are that good.
That's right. This is what I do. And Jimmy, you have access to this 3 hours a day. Do you realize that?
Do you understand? Just before I go to bed at night, I'm thankful for a lot of things,
Right.
but none more so than the 3 hours I get to spend with the Bank of Knowledge to my right.
Anything you want to add?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Dustin, we appreciate it as always. I guess take a deep breath after the draft and after vacation. Welcome back, and we will talk to you soon. Appreciate the time.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Again, that's our friend from the Indianapolis Star, which at one time was part of the Indianapolis News, where I was an honor carrier, by the way, but his name is Dustin
Dopirak.
and he was on the CarX Tire and Auto Guest Line. I'm all on board with this, Jimmy. I'm pushing it. Matter of fact, I'm going to get the marketing folks on top of logos. But I have my idea for the logo. Do you like my idea for the logo?
I do, but isn't that something that you then need to go back down to the patent office or trademark office and make sure that you get all that solidified?
No, because I'm not looking for money off of it.
Okay,
This is look.
This isn't Why Not Indiana. This is a different thing. This is a.
Although, you know what? It probably would be smart if I go ahead and
I know.
do it now, right?
Looking out for you.
But the logo is the thing that I need. I have the idea of.
This is just your passion project.
Do you remember the movie that was going to catapult IndyCar into a new stratosphere? They were hoping it would be like cars, called Turbo.
Yes.
It was the snail. So
Yeah.
the logo for the movie Turbo, the word turbo is like slanted to the right, like with the motion, like it's peeling, like it's taking off.
Right. It's clever.
So slicks is going to be that. Like the word slicks is going to be slanted to the right, like it's shoo, like it's taking off. And then the C, so SLI, and then the C itself is the IndyCar tire, but the left side of it is the darker, so it looks like a C, and then the KS.
Sure.
And people are going to say, well, what are slicks? In IndyCar racing, when you come in for a new set of tires, those are called slicks, right?
Yeah.
They're actually called sticker tires, but slicks is also the name of a tire. So there you go, the slicks, and then.
Are you going to have some slicked back hair on the S to further, accentuate the messaging? Or are you worried that might give shady connotations?
If the logo included the other kind of father of the franchise, Donnie Walsh, then you've got the slick back hair, right? I mean, that Donnie was always known for that hair itself. But I think Slick Leonard, that's it. It's slick, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Somebody asked the other day, and this is always the joke of like the summer months of sports talk radio, like, oh, so like who's your Mount Rushmore of whatever? It's like the lamest thing in sports talk, right? But somebody asked me the other day on social media, who is the Pacers Mount Rushmore? And I'm like, well, they have 4 players that are in the Hall of Fame whose numbers are in the rafters. So isn't that right there your answer?
Yep.
I mean, when you have George McGinnis, Roger Brown, Mel Daniels, and Reggie Miller as your 4 numbers that are retired, bada boom, bada bang.
What if it didn't pertain to just players and you could put on, let's say, Simon?
Well, in that case, if you are just
Donnie,
just my opinion, if you are including executives and coaches, etc., and you need 4, then you go with 2. You go with probably Mel Simon and Slick, and then in the middle, Reggie Miller and I would actually say Roger Brown. I know George McGinnis, that feels blasphemous, but Roger Brown is most known as a Pacer. McGinnis was, an NBA star with Philadelphia as well. And Roger Brown was probably their best and most clutch ABA player. Reggie Miller, their best and most clutch NBA player. And then on either side of it, the owner that basically saved them and the general manager and coach. Nancy Leonard would be there as well, but Bobby Leonard to kind of represent both since he coached. There's your 4. I have a question for you, Jimmy, about something that happened last night that confused me, and I want you to I get confused by these things. I want you to help me out from last night where I got very confused and felt old.
I'll do my best.
And then after that, I felt very salient and young. But different story. So we'll get to that next. About something I saw last night that I need you to educate me on. But before we do that, We go to the phone lines where Sean has called in. I don't think Sean has a patent attorney ready to sue me just yet, but I want to go over this. Sean, you have also gone to the same place I have to trademark Why Not Indiana. You have your own trademarks, correct?
Well, not Why Not Indiana, the Indy Slicks, or Slicks as a sports name. I do have a patent attorney. A friend of mine from college is a patent attorney. So the day you guys announced that they were moving from Fort Wayne, I was in the car just thinking, and I thought kind of the same lines. I actually called into JMV. I think you were off the air at the end of your show, and gave him the idea on the show on that day. So, great minds think alike, Jake.
Now, and I can't remember. So did you send it to me and I ran with it, or I said Slicks and then you heard it? I can't remember which way it went. Irrelevant.
No, I sent it in to both you and called into JMV that day.
Okay.
So texted it to you and texted to you a couple other times.
Okay, so here's the real trick, because I'm going to try to beat you to the punch here. No, I'm just kidding. So you've trademarked Slicks, but what about, and I don't know how this would work, do you have to also trademark, like, let's say, for example, if you have Slicks trademarked and they decide to go with Indiana and you have it as Indianapolis, or they go with Indy and you have it as Indiana or Naptown or whatever it might be, do you have all variations that are possible trademarked?
The Slicks portion is what I have trademarked.
Gotcha.
Okay. So it's as a sports team or sports use for Slicks. Now the other items, the Naptown, the Indianapolis, there are a lot of things that are already covered under that, and there are things that keep you from trademarking those things, obviously. So
now, do you like my idea for a logo? Or are you down with that? I'm not looking for $1. I just want credit. Do you like my idea for a logo?
No, I love your idea. No, I think your logo is spot on. I hired my 13-year-old to draw me a logo, and I actually texted that to you. And she did her best on the iPad, and it looks great. But I definitely like your idea for sure. The covering up of the tire to make the C is outstanding.
All right. Well, so I'm looking right here. You texted me a logo of Slick Leonard in a race car. That's pretty good, really, to be honest with you. That's a pretty good logo. But so that can be the actual, graphic logo. But in terms of the name itself, I'm going with Slicks with the C as part of the tire and everything else, and then you get all the money, and we'll do what we can. I don't have ink by the barrel. I just have a microphone. And, Sean, the challenge here is, and I appreciate the fact that I know you listen to the show, but I think you're one of like 7 people that do. So we got to try to get this out to more people, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all for it. I actually was hoping to have T-shirts made to wear at the Speedway, working with you at the radio network. So that did not happen, obviously.
All right. Well, Sean was up with me in turn 4 for that was the road course, right? Wasn't that when you came up there?
No, I spot for Nick. So
well, I know you spot for Nick, but you came up for me during the GP, didn't you?
Sorry. Yes. You're correct.
Yeah. Okay. See, it all comes together now. All right, Sean. Have a good weekend. And when the team is announced, we're going to have you on when it's called the Slicks, and you're making a bunch of money and you're involved in lawsuits.
I fully anticipate to have front row seats for one night to the Indy Fuel as a payment. So,
all right, there you go. All right, and we'll look for you. We'll look for you on the People's Court, and we'll enjoy the Doug Llewellyn interview that takes place.
Absolutely. Hey, Jake, have a good weekend. We'll see you.
All right, appreciate it, Sean. Indy Slicks, I'm telling you, I'm on board. I forgot that he had sent me that he trademarked it, and that obviously was where the seed was planted in terms of what I was thinking on it, because that was a couple months ago, I think, when we first mentioned that. Jimmy, last night I'm at dinner. DJ, the official electrician of the show, was sitting down next to me, and maybe that's why all of a sudden I noticed that the light bulb that pops over my head with different ideas was a bit dimmed, and I didn't get a chance for DJ to work on it. And all I knew was this, and people got really mad at me. I looked up and I saw that the United States was playing Panama in football, soccer as we know it, and I simply get curious. I literally just get curious. When I see like Central American or South American countries that I know are good in sports or, that are prominent, I wonder to myself, I wonder how big it is. So I looked up, how big is Panama? And I found it interesting that Panama, if it were a U.S. state, Because it gives you an idea of what kind of an area you're talking about, because then it becomes relative for people, right? In terms of how, because if you're watching the match, and I mean, I was in a bar, in a restaurant, so I just see it up on the screen, and I'm like, you know what? Like, I know the Panama Canal. I know where Panama is. My buddy Dewey was born in Canal Zone, Panama, right? So I'm familiar with Panama. John McCain was born in Canal Zone, Panama. I'm familiar with Panama, but I'm like, I wonder how big Panama is. So I looked it up. If Panama was a U.S. state, Eddie, did you happen to see the tweet? If you did not admit,
Did not.
okay. If Panama was a state in the United States of America, it would rank where in terms of land area? What number? 1 through 50. Go.
12.
Jimmy?
20th.
41st. It would be between South Carolina and West Virginia. But that gives you an idea of the size of it, right? You're like, okay, so it's the size of South Carolina or West Virginia.
Sure. And they oftentimes, in big matches, they do it in the Euros, they do it in the World Cup, they've done it in Copa America here, which is what the United States are playing in. They will show you throughout the broadcast population size. So they'll show up to the top left,
Okay.
and you'll see, like, you know, whatever.
In terms of population, it would rank where? Jimmy, go ahead. 1 through 50 if it was a state, Panama.
32nd.
Eddie?
What was the number for the size of the state?
41st.
41st?
Yep.
I'll say 21st.
Close. 27th. So it would rank in population between Oregon and Kentucky. So that gives you an idea, right? You're like, okay. So, and I totally understand. So I sent that. I sent that tweet, and immediately people are like, you're a hater. Are you even watching the match? Can you explain what happened? And I'm like, no, I can't actually. So I'm going to ask Jimmy exactly that. I do know, and I understand and respect the fact that in different, it's like baseball. You know, why are the great teams in college baseball typically Florida, Miami, Texas A&M, obviously Tennessee? Well, I mean, more so than Michigan, Washington. You know, you don't see a lot of great baseball players coming out of North Dakota. You know why? Although Roger Maris is from Fargo. For the obvious, because you can play it year-round in those other places. There's better players in baseball coming from warm weather climates because they're able to play it outdoors 12 months a year. And I would assume the same is true of soccer and football. Also, it goes without saying that it is one of the sports, and this is not meant as a knock at all, but it is a sport that socioeconomics are not necessarily vital to the success of a nation because it is not overly expensive to play. You don't need the elaborate equipment that you need in football or hockey or even baseball.
Except the one area where it does matter and why it's a negative in this country is because it has been for years, and it's gotten a little bit better, but it's been for years, the only real way to be able to expose yourself and put your talent out there of being a great player and represent your country is through club soccer. And club soccer and things of that nature, not all clubs, but some, it becomes privatized.
Well,
it becomes high level of entry fee to get yourself
correct.
out there.
I
You're
think
right.
that's fair.
In theory, all you need is 2 trash cans and a soccer ball. But in order to
a big thing too, though, Jimmy, let's be real, in this country, and I know how big soccer is in the United. I mean, this is not meant as some sort of anti-soccer or deep dive soccer conversation. I know how big soccer is. Like, for example, okay, Mason Glansman. How about a hand? Can we get a hand, please, for Mason Glansman? Okay, Mason is the son of not one but 2 of my high school classmates, Mitch and Jada. Okay, and Mason just today announced that he has made the Hoosier Premier Under-17 MLS Next Team. I don't know necessarily what that means, but soccer and I know it's a big deal to make different soccer clubs,
Sure.
right? It's very cool. So congratulations to Mason. I know what that means in terms of soccer. The difference between here and a lot of other places is the obvious, and it's not a knock, but that is that we do have youth sports that are very involved in a number of different sports, baseball and football being 2 of them that are more prominent here than they are in a lot of places where soccer is played and enjoyed. But what I wanted to ask you is simply this, and pardon me if I am putting my neck out on the line here as the lone moron in the city, but the tournament that the World Cup is the creme de la creme.
correct.
And you always want to qualify for or be in the running for the World Cup. Now, the area where I get confused as a more transcendent soccer follower, I do enjoy the World Cup a great deal because I like the fact that there's sports that's on a Tuesday at 1 in the afternoon. It's fun to watch, right? Having said that, the one area where I get confused now is there, with the increased involvement of American interest in the sport of soccer, there is more interest in each time that the men's national team plays, and they're involved in a number of different tournaments, some of which seem to have an impact or effect on their eligibility or placement within the World Cup, and others that I find out are totally irrelevant, and they're just like little fun things that are going on, and it's disappointing, but it means nothing in the grand scheme of things. So the tournament that is currently taking place is exactly what, and its bearing on the World Cup is what?
For the tournaments that the United States could participate in, the World Cup is first, Copa America, which they have to be invited to be a part of because it's generally a Central America and South American tournament. Copa America is what's going on right now.
And Copa stands for what?
It's not I don't think it's an acronym. I think it's just I don't know. I'm just telling you it's the oldest tournament. There are areas of gaps in my knowledge.
And it involves nations. You have to be from one of the from the American continents, correct?
For this particular installment of it. Again, generally it's Central and South American countries with invites extended up to North American countries. For example, Canada is involved in it this year. The United States are involved in it this year. But it's the oldest soccer tournament in the world. It's just much like the European Championship, Jake, it's exclusive to continent, but it's the closest thing to the World Cup when you have like continent versus continent type of tournaments.
Right.
That's what the World Cup is. Where
so
it's
basically,
everybody.
this is the soccer Pan American Games.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is the Pan American
correct,
Games are
sure.
limited to North, South, and Central America.
Effectively, and you have the Euros over there concurrently running. The why the Copa America is so important is unlike the Gold Cup, which is another tournament that you've probably heard casually in passing. It went on last year, where you're only really playing people within North America, strictly North America, like you might play Mexico or Canada or stuff like that. This opens you up to better competition and simulates kind of a World Cup feel. Like you could play Argentina, who just won the World Cup this last cycle in 2022. You could play Uruguay, who's one of the most successful, if not the most successful Copa America country in terms of trophies. The United States has to play them on Monday. It's about tuning yourself up to get ready for the World Cup is what this tournament allows you to do.
Now, so the Copa America tournament, there is an equivalent or a sister tournament, if you will, in Europe, correct?
Correct.
Does the winner of the Copa tournament face off against the winner of the European tournament?
I can't remember. I have heard that is a thing. I believe it is. I think that I'm 70% certain that is a thing, that there is a neutral one-off that is played between the European champion and the Copa America champion. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that is true.
Okay, now, this, however, has no impact on the United States placement within the World Cup,
It
correct?
does not. They are guaranteed to be in the World Cup this coming cycle 2 years from now because they are a host nation. The host nation is always guaranteed. In this case, it's them, Canada, and Mexico because it was a joint bid. But if you're a host nation, you're guaranteed in the World Cup. So it has no bearing, but, and I don't want to get us too much in the weeds here, but there are a lot of people, myself included, who are unhappy with the manager of the United States men's national team in Greg Berhalter.
That seems always to be the case, though. People are always upset with the manager of the United States men's national
That is factual.
team.
That is factual throughout my lifetime. There's always been complaints and frustrations. The real frustration on my end is, and by many pundits that view this as a wasted opportunity for the United States, is it's being labeled a golden generation of talent, like one of the best teams the United States has ever had. And there's some stuff that I don't want to get in the weeds to of tactical decisions or substitutions or roster construction or adjustments that largely, for the most part, since last cycle's World Cup, have been blamed on Berhalter. There was some off-the-pitch stuff as well that went down where it was uncertain whether or not he'd be retained or not. They do end up retaining him. And this was supposed to be, in a lot of ways, not just a tune-up, but a tryout to some extent with 2 years to go until the World Cup and this golden generation of players. Do you want to trot it back out there with Berhalter and keep him as your manager, or is Monday a referendum on his coaching tenure? One could argue last night, one of the United States players, Tim Weah, retaliated against a Panama player, kind of went upstairs, sort of a half punch to the face. He got sent off, got a red card 18 minutes in. They're down a man the entirety of that match. So one could argue, oh, well, that's not fully Berhalter's fault. Well, they got a lead. You could argue their strategy once they had the lead was dog water. you could point other blames than just that one match on his managerial career. And now on Monday night, it is not just a win and you're into the knockout rounds of Copa America. It's you lose, you would miss out of a group stage when you're a host country in Copa America. It would be a terrible look for the program. And it's one of those situations where Greg Berhalter, you could argue, is managing for his life on Monday night because you cannot afford to waste. You talk about it all the time, Jake. People saying, "Oh, I've been hearing for 30 years that
That's a sport of the
soccer's
future
gonna,
since 1978." Right.
All right. Well, whether or not people agree with that or not, the idea of embarrassing yourself as a host nation in 2 years when you're hosting the World Cup, the greatest trophy that sport has to offer, it's inexcusable. You cannot afford to gamble it with a manager that you're half in, half out on. If they lose to Uruguay on Monday, which I think they probably will, he should be ousted and it should be a change of direction for the United States men's national team going into 2026.
By the way, Eddie, do we have the breaking news sounder? This just in. I want you to put some sort of padding on your forehead because you're about to slap it really hard, Jimmy.
Do you have enough padding for me?
Well, I do not. We've run out of foam.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Copa is Spanish for cup.
How about that? I
Isn't
should have
it-
known that.
I
it
just
technically-
assumed because of what's the other
No,
one?
it
Like,
makes sense.
but isn't there one like Conca?
Yeah, sure. But well, CONCACAF is it. That's,
CONCACAF,
that's the geographic. But yeah, sure.
So
yeah.
I assumed that it was some
Yeah.
sort of an acronym, a bunch
Yeah.
of. I didn't even
Yeah.
think of the simplistic
Duh.
and obvious, which is that it's the cup.
Yeah, that
Isn't it
makes sense.
technically America? Isn't that because there's the tilde over the E?
There is. You're correct. Yes. I'm just being straight American today.
I thought you were
Full
gonna
on
go with
100%.
Estados de United. Right? I mean, while we're doing it, right? I mean, come on. How many languages do you speak, Jimmy?
One fluently.
Eddie?
I can
Dos.
dabble in a couple like counting.
How well do you
Here
speak
and there.
Spanish, Eddie?
Not very well. I mean, I can understand it. I can't speak it well.
Do you want to know a little Jake Query fun fact? I'm sure both of you do.
Always, every day.
Do you know what language I was essentially fluent? 30 years ago, there was a language that I probably would have qualified as fluent in a language because I had to take a ton of it in college. And
Oh, I know what it is.
do you know what it is, Eddie? I'll tell you in just a couple of minutes. Great band. The Outfield. We went to a game last year with the radio network and when we were in Birmingham, and Michael Young was fascinated by the fact that they kept playing that song. And we were like 6 innings into it where they were playing it, and Michael Young would stand up and finish the singing as that guy started out with, Josie's on a vacation far away. And finally, Mark Jane said, Michael, I don't know if you figured out, but that's the walk-up song for the shortstop.
Did they stop the music on Tonight and the crowd just yells it?
The crowd was singing along, none of them louder than Michael, I can assure you, yes. Okay, so when I was in college, I began as an English major at Indiana, actually at University of Kansas, and then I transferred to Indiana.
Rock job.
And that's about the number of total credits I got right there was 2 of them, right, when I came from Lawrence. So I arrived in Bloomington, and I was an English major, and they said, well, you need 8 semesters of foreign language, and the way it has to be, I think I had the option of either taking one foreign language for all 4 years or splitting it and taking 2 different foreign languages for 2 years each. So I took Spanish for 2 years, and I don't know, did either one of you guys have to take a foreign language in college?
No, I did not.
I did not.
So, it's really involved. It's a lot different than high school foreign language, especially at Indiana, which prides itself on its foreign language department.
I struggled with it mightily in high school. I took
It's
3
tough.
different languages in high school. I took German, Spanish, and French.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed different aspects of it, but for whatever reason, the way that I learned, it didn't translate to the way it was taught. And so I was too fearful of trying to put that on a college curriculum.
The narrative has always been that learning a foreign language is kind of like water skiing. If you do it when you're really young,
sure,
you have kind of a natural
Mm-hmm.
acumen, but the older you get, the harder it becomes. Like getting your wisdom teeth taken out. You don't want to do it late. But I took 4 semesters, 2 years of Spanish, and then, it was pretty accelerated at that point. And I said, okay, I'll take French. Well, I go in for the first day for my first semester of French.
What are we doing here? I thought we were supposed to guess.
Only one.
I thought you told us you wanted us to guess.
Let me finish here.
Okay.
Patience is a virtue.
I was about to say, well, you spilled the beans on 2 of the languages here.
So I'm sitting there in French class, and within the first week, I'm the only one that hasn't had 4 years of it in high school and been to Montreal or Paris. So I had to drop the French because I was lost immediately. And it's kind of like Spanish, so it was difficult.
Sure.
So I walked into the foreign language advisor's office and said, what is the easiest language that is offered at Indiana University? And she said, Bambara. And so what's Bambara? She said, it's an African language, but it's primarily clicking. That kind of thing. And I said, well, sign me up. So I signed up for Bambara. I walk in. It's myself and 9 people. And a graduate student is teaching it. And we're learning how to say hello and things like that in a clicking language. I kid you not. After 3 weeks, maybe, we all show up for class one day. Somebody comes in and says, we have a bit of bad news. The graduate student that was teaching this course ran into some issues and is no longer available to teach the course and is the only person in the state of Indiana that is qualified to teach Bambara. And so this class is no longer available at Indiana University. So I walked back in and said, what's the second easiest language that you offer? I took that language. I took it for 3 semesters. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. We had a graduate student who, it was great. We would go out in the community. He was smart because he would have us grocery shop for him by giving us a list in the language. We had to learn it. I was literally essentially fluent in this language. I needed 1 more semester of it, and then I ended up not going back to school until a year ago, in which that class is no longer offered because it was obviously a graduate student that was native to the language that was teaching it. So that redirected my degree that I ultimately finished. But that said, there you go. Guys, real quick, because Kevin Bowen's going to join us in a couple of minutes. Eddie, your guess on the language, which is widely used with a number of different countries within a continent that is not North America. The language is?
I initially was going to say Dutch, but I'll go with German.
German, okay. Jimmy Cook?
I was going to say Dutch, so I'll stick with Dutch.
Okay. The language is, and my name in the class, because, when you take a foreign language.
You got to pick up name.
Right. My name was Bonham Kubwa. Bonham Kubwa.
That doesn't. I feel like
Garrison?
the Dutch is off the board.
Eddie Garrison, Buonam Kubwa means big man or big, large man. Would you like to look up for me what Buonam Kubwa, what language that is, please? I will spell it for you.
I was okay.
BWANAMKUBWA. Now, at the time, a prominent athlete was Kijana Carter. I can tell you that Kijana means little baby. If you want to look up little baby, if you want to look up Kijana and tell me what language it is, maybe that will also give you the answer.
Is it Portuguese?
Jumbo was how you would say hello. Mwanafuzi, I believe, was my friend. Kanaliki, I think, was how are you. But I literally learned this language to the point where I went to see a movie that used the language, and I was able to interpret it before the subtitles, and my friends were absolutely enthralled by it. You lose it very quickly because I've never used it since, but I literally was borderline fluent in this language. Eddie, are you finding the answer?
I don't know if your spelling was right or not. It wouldn't pop up with the translation.
Put in Kijana. Kijana. And see what it says. Eddie is looking feverishly here.
Well, okay. Australian, I can't even say that. Second word, language, something?
No. The answer is Swahili.
Okay.
Number 9 in this random top 10 list of easiest languages to learn is Swahili.
Okay. Not bad, right?
No.
It popped up initially as Zambia. I was like, that can't be right.
Kijana is a small jackal pup, also apparently in one of the Lion King movies. But I'm telling you, that was what it was known for at the time, little baby Kijana. Because Kijana Carter was really popular, and the teacher kept telling us, little baby, little baby. Kevin Bowen joining us just a couple minutes, and then it's a feel-good, good for the heart Friday. We'll get to that bottom of the hour. Great song. They had 2 big hits. Now, do you know what year this song was, Eddie?
No, do not.
I believe there's a lyric coming up, which we probably can't get to if we wait that long, where he says,
I figured out the
and now we stand right here in 82. What's that?
Yep. 82.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Joining us now, and I'm
82,
sure thrilled to be doing so based on that little bit of pop trivia quiz. He's on the CarX Tire and Auto guest line. Kevin Bowen, you hear him in the morning on the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy, where we played some of the audio from this morning with Chad Buchanan, general manager of the Pacers. Kevin, nice job on that interview. What were your overall takeaways from your guys' lengthy conversation with Buchanan?
Yeah, it sounds like, they're obviously heavily leaning towards, being that team running back, rely on the internal growth. We'll see what Jarris Walker looks like in Summer League. The fact that, it's not a given that, all top 10 picks, come back and play that second year in Summer League. But, I thought he was pretty specific and, he wants him to be more forceful. And, I guess I'm putting words in Chad's mouth, but I kind of interpret it as, like doing a lot of the dirty work. And, maybe it's not the flashy stuff that shows up on the highlight reel, but almost kind of getting back to the player we saw a little bit at Houston. And I think when you consider the makeup of the Pacers team, a player of that style makes a lot of sense. It's probably the annual draft question you're always asked. Hey, do you have any intrigue about, trading up and, kind of what would have, made, or what, I guess in the Pacers case, what made them pause. And I mean, he mentioned asking price, but, he also kind of threw in, don't want to mess with the chemistry of this group. So I think it's just kind of another reminder of how bullish they are on what they've got. And then, I would say probably the last thing would just be, what is that asking price for Obi Toppin? How rich does it get? Yes, they want to bring him back, but, there's a price for everything. And how high could that get before they say, all right, enough is enough, and our cap or our cap situation and our cash is a lot different. We can't go there.
Kevin, oh, sorry, Jimmy. I remember, when a year ago, and it's funny how things change. I think you were, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember if it was a sit-in that you were doing or a hunger strike or something, but you were on some sort of a mission to make sure that they re-signed Jalen Smith. You remember that? And rightly so. I mean, we both were like, they got a value in retaining Jalen Smith, but now he has a year later, or was it 2 years? Yeah, a year later, he has exercised his right, the player option. He declined his player option. Is that right, Jimmy?
That is correct. There's been a handful of reports say that he will be an unrestricted free
agent.
agent.
So he'll be an unrestricted free
$5
agent. Do you anticipate that Jalen Smith is somebody that the Pacers would go back to the negotiating table and try to retain?
Boy, I would assume no, right? I don't know. It would have to be a much smaller asking price. What was that player option that goes a little north of $5 million?
I think it was 5.7 maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, I would assume no. The Jalen Smith Pacers tenure, I mean, it's like a junior high relationship.
Totally,
like,
that's
so
a
many
perfect
highs
way of
and
saying
lows.
it.
Like, it's like, wait, he's a 4 one day, he's a 5 the next. Oh my gosh, he's playing like really good basketball for you. You got him for whatever they traded. I'm trying to think of even what that was. It TJ Warren? I kind of forget what they even gave up for him, but it was nothing of substance at the time. And you felt like, hey, here's another lottery pick from that draft, where now the Pacers have all the lottery picks seemingly from that draft, and you really found something. So, yeah, I just assumed it kind of had reached the point where, in the playoffs, he's been benched, and then they went with Isaiah Jackson, of course, that. If for a guy that young who has shown flashes, it's not like he has been, awful by any means in his NBA career. You would think he would want to try that somewhere else with playing time as well as the financial compensation. So that's where I do think, last night I thought to myself, do they go out and draft a center? Is that something that they do? And I don't think, any of the three guys would qualify as that at all, really. So I don't know. Maybe that's something that, with the fringe money they have, or depending on what happens with Toppin, maybe that's something that we see at some point.
On the CarX Tire and Auto guest line, he is Kevin Bowen. You hear him weekdays 7 to 10 a.m. on these very airwaves in the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy. And, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at KBowen1070. Kevin, the other aspect of Chad Buchanan's comments that I found most fascinating was going off of, again, the run-it-back aspect of what this offseason will be. But for this team, this is not how I feel about them, but it's how they're portrayed nationally. They make it to the conference finals in a year that they were not supposed to be in that spot. They were ahead of schedule. And if you're going to be a real hater, you would say that, well, look at all the injuries that went their way. If you're being a true hater, you would say that about the Boston Celtics and really anybody that went in the Eastern Conference playoffs because of how many injuries there shockingly were. But at the end of the day, they made it there. They got that playoff experience. They can build off of that now. This whole run it back philosophy, and you and I have been, you so more than me, but we've both been the biggest advocates of the player I'm about to mention. Team run it back. How much of that exclusively hinges on Bennedict Mathurin, A, being healthy, and B, taking that massive leap forward to being a franchise player they think he can be? Or is it more complex than that? Because for me, I don't want to say none of the other stuff matters, but that's always been the one that you couldn't miss on. And that is the piece that, as it stands right now, would, I think, put them over the top if he takes that leap forward. Do you see it that same way, or is it deeper than that?
Yeah, he's definitely a huge chunk of the pie. I think, Jimmy, would probably be the way I would put it. I mean, as you're asking the question, I was trying to divvy up percentages of okay, let's say Mathurin 60% of run it back belief. Maybe Jarris Walker's 25% of it, and then the rest would be on some sort of hey, wait a minute, let's just get this team back together for a training camp. Because obviously this time last year, it's Bruce Brown, it's Buddy Hield, and there's no Siakam. So, it was really kind of, build the plane in the air for the Pacers last season in terms of, rotation and guys' fits and injuries and trades, et cetera, et cetera. So, yes, Mathurin is a big, big part of it. I mean, Jarris Walker was taking, 2 spots behind him? It's not like, he should be looked at in a somewhat similar light, especially because he's the one that has the defensive background. Mathurin does not. Mathurin is not viewed in that light. So I don't want to lose sight of Walker. And then in general, again, I just think a lot of it is, hey, let's see what you have with this group full off season, that sort of aspect to it. And that's where I think, run it back has such a negative connotation. It's such a, it's a phrase I feel like very few fans want to hear. And, when you look at our market right now with the Colts and the Pacers, both of them largely are running it back. Now the Colts are doing it with so much invested in this unique quarterback, and he can, whatever, he can when healthy, he can change the game significantly. And now for the first time, the Colts have a really dynamic QB with run and a throw standpoint, and they haven't had that in quite some time, et cetera, et cetera. There's not that equivalent with the Pacers, but yet, the Pacers aren't running it back either with a bunch of 30-year-olds. I get where Chad Buchanan and their thought overall comes from it. It's outside of Siakam and Turner, this is a pretty young basketball team. And, even Siakam, of course, didn't have a training camp here. And it's not like Turner's on, hole 18 of his career here either. So I get it.
I think that contract spooks people, though, Kevin, because of the fact that with where this is being mapped out, unless you get an extension, and I don't think he's extension eligible. I need to check that with Eddie, but with Miles, you're looking at, is he extension eligible?
You can't extend him during the season. It has to be after next season.
Okay, so, you're looking at a boat where it is a contract year for him. I think there's fears on the – because you're right. It's Mathurin and Siakam as your 1A, 1B. Or sorry, let me rephrase that. I apologize. Got ahead of myself. It's Halliburton and Siakam as your 1A, 1B, and then you're hoping that Mathurin, at times you saw last in the playoffs against Boston in particular, man, I know this isn't how they always play, but a guy that could create his own shot or get to the basket, boy, that would be nice here. And Mathurin could have filled that role tremendously. But the other, I think, aspect of it that gets people concerned, not with the idea of running it back, but it's, you can't fully see the clear landing zone for this team in 2 years because a core piece with you right now in Miles Turner, he's not on hole 18, but from a contract standpoint, he's on hole 18 of this round, right? If you're dividing his career into 4 rounds to borrow your golf analogy, there's that element of, wait a minute, Miles is not only a beloved piece, a critical piece, and you're mapping out all this money you're going to have to dole out to other players like Mathurin, like Walker down the line. You just had a tough decision with Siakam. You're going to have that same decision next offseason with Miles Turner.
Yeah, I certainly hear you out. And I guess a little bit of that, Jimmy, kind of went back to the, hey, if you're going to have these 3 second-round picks, yes, they're second-round picks, but just throw a dart at a center and see what happens, just because, again, just the future and the general depth chart of that position is a little bit up in the air. And again, I've been an advocate for I can get where running back comes from, but that doesn't mean that you don't answer calls. That doesn't mean you don't listen to, wait a minute, Andrew Nemhard's valued like this league-wide? Okay, for us, he's a shooting guard. And now people look at him as a point guard like this, like, oh, wow, that's what they'd be willing to offer? We might need to look long and hard at that. Obviously I don't know, but it just doesn't seem like they're totally gung-ho on, I'm sure they're listening, but, actually following through on that seems to be a different story. And this is probably a little bit too, like, NBA contract nerdy, but the Pacers are in a weird spot that they don't have, like, the most tradable contracts. Like Nemhard and Matherin and Walker and, some of these guys are, like, you're intrigued, and to some degree they're good. They've proven themselves in the NBA, a little bit more Nemhard, a little bit more Matherin. But again, they don't make really any money.
Yeah, and you know that big payday's coming, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but it's just hard to trade that. Like, it's easy to trade
That's
back
what I mean.
Brogdon because, again, you can match salaries and you can do that. Outside of Turner, Siakam and Halliburton are in a different stratosphere. Outside of Turner, they don't have, like, the middle-of-the-pack contracts, if you will, which, again, I think helped facilitate. It's why the Pacers could trade, Oladipo back in the day, LeVert, Warren, Brogdon, of course, those sorts of guys. So I do think the Pacers are just kind of in a, again, awkward sounds negative, but they are in kind of an awkward spot. Again, I think it's a good spot to be in because they have this young talent. It's intriguing. They can do a lot of different things in terms of their own roster, draft pick, cap space-wise, not necessarily. But, again, it's something to where I view this right now of, like, I probably a little bit more listen to it than most, but at the same time, I understand where they're coming from. And all right, if we run it back, it's not just a stationary 31, 32-year-old roster, and we've got 1 or 2 more years at it. I don't view it in that light at all.
Kevin Bowen is our guest. He's on the CarX Tire and Auto guest line. Kevin, of course, on July 18th coming up, it is our outing at Back 9, presented by Franciscan Health. Everything getting underway at 11 a.m., just after you guys with Andy sign off, and then we'll be doing the show, so too will J&V at noon. July 18th, we would love for people to come out, enjoy some of the food, the beverages. Jack Daniels will have refreshments there as well as one of the sponsors, 1075thefan.com, where people can find ticket information. I'm curious, as a newbie to the game of golf, and for those that are listening that know that you are a state champion golf from your days in high school and an avid golfer, realistically, when you go play a round of golf, Kevin, how many clubs do you typically use?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I don't know, 7-ish, 8-ish? Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on, like, what tees you're playing. If you're playing a little bit of a longer golf course, you might use the full bag. But if you're playing a little bit of a shorter golf course, you're probably not dipping into the long iron. So, yeah, I would say 7 or 8.
Okay, so you got your driver, and then you probably have, and again, I'm showing my relative novice nature here, but for those that are also, casual golfers, you got your driver, obviously, you got your putter. I mean, those are givens. You obviously need some sort of a pitch iron. Whether or not you use a sand iron, there's a couple of them right there. Then what are the other ones? So do you go in with a hybrid, like a 3 hybrid, and then just like a 6 iron, and that's pretty much going to cap you out, or are you all the way across the board all the time? And is that a level of experience that allows you to do that?
Yeah, I would think. I mean, depending on yardages, you could just be like driver, a hybrid. To your point, if you get to a par 5 and you get your second shot, you want to hit something a little bit longer. But then again, if the par 3s aren't very long, you could just be like 8 iron and under. So 8 iron, 9 iron, pitching wedge, sand wedge, gap wedge. Yeah, something along those lines.
And what's the toughest club for you?
Ooh, any sort of long iron, yeah, like 5, like a 5 iron, 4 iron, yeah. I get a little nervy, very nervy, and I hate the 50-yard shot. Get very nervy, very sweaty.
I thought, by the way, I was really proud of this, Kevin. Chris Ballard has made it known, and we've only played it 1,000 times, that he listens and reads, everything that you do because of the wide-out comments, and frickin' Bowen is always writing about this and that. And then he mentioned in a podcast recently when talking about Anthony Richardson's shoulder, He said, look, this is a city when it comes to shoulders that has PTSD based on precedent. These are buzzwords that I've been using forever, and then I got excited thinking that also he's listening to this program as well. Or is it just that that's like the most unoriginal narrative of all time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure lunch break. Don't you think he's dialing you guys up for that? I mean, you guys come with that meaty, 12 to 12:24 segment. Yeah, I'm sure he's, dialing you guys up as he goes to, what the hell is Rick's Cafe, Rick's Boatyard. I mean, I'm sure that's what he's doing over there on the west side. So, yeah, I don't, maybe a subscription to the Star or the Athletic, something like that for Chris Ballard. Yeah.
No, he's reading your blog, clearly, because every time he reads it, it's all about wideouts, right?
Well, yes, something along those lines, yes.
But do you, because I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I know that they can say over and over and over, look, we're not worried about the shoulder itself, but then he says, although I understand why people are with Anthony Richardson, I thought Bill Polian, Kevin, made a really good point when we had him on when he said, if there is one injury that you can take to the bank what the doctor tells you, it is shoulder. It is the one that has the least margin for, like, in other words, it's the one that usually goes pretty much to fruition of the way that they prognosticated. So if they say that everything's good with Richardson, then that probably means everything's good. Do you have, I know we've had this conversation before, but the point right now, what's your level of concern?
Well, let me answer it like this. I think there's two Richardson-related injury questions. One is the shoulder, and the other is wear and tear of getting hit week in and week out over 17 games, and just what injuries evolve from that. Now, of course, the shoulder did evolve from that, but I think those are kind of the two injuries. And the shoulder, I don't have like a ton of concern over. Am I curious what it's going to look like in training camp when the workload is actually real? Certainly. Because, if you look back on, when he developed the soreness, 3 weeks ago now during minicamp, that was not a very extensive workload that led to that. I mean, it was a dozen throws on a Tuesday, really just about a handful of team throws on a Wednesday, and then boom, he's out. So, training camp workload, while not, crazy extensive, it is more of a, hey, 2 days in a row, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5, that sort of workload. And obviously, once you get to training camp, you don't get month and a half off. I mean, right now you're in a month and a half break, so no one cares. Or, I guess your care factor, to steal Nate Bjorkgren phrase, is a little lower than it would be come, obviously, September, October, et cetera, et cetera. Now, put that side of the injury, whatever, to the back burner, the shoulder, you still, I think, can ask the question of what happens, again, when the red jersey comes off. And, Eddie and I have talked about this religiously on our podcast about, how many hits does he take and what does that look like over 17 games, and how many design runs will Shane Steichen dial up? Shane Steichen does not strike me as an individual that's going to dial back any of that. I've used the phrase quite often, so apologize to the audience for repeating myself, but, I've said limit, not eliminate when it comes to the amount of runs, the amount of design runs for Anthony Richardson. And, yeah, you're playing a little bit of a math game there, and sure, he can get hurt on any given play, but whatever. If you take out 4 design runs a game and you go off of 17 games during a season, you're obviously going to eliminate a decent amount of number of potential hits. And if you look at it last year, all 4 injuries occurred on design runs. All 4 of them occurred outside of the pocket. Obviously, all 4 of those were dialed up by Shane Steichen. So, how do you just try and lessen that a little bit while still having the threat and making sure that there are moments where he's using his legs, because that's why you drafted him 4th overall. So that's kind of how I view the injury of, shoulder workload wise, it's going to ramp up in a month. I'm curious. I'm not overly concerned, but I'm definitely curious because, again, the soreness popped up, a few weeks ago without really extensive work. Now, what happens when the work grows in training camp? And more importantly, what happens when the red jersey comes off and all of a sudden, he's in a lot of uncontrolled environments when the season rolls around?
Kevin Bowen is our guest on the CarX Tire and Auto Guest Line. You hear him weekdays 7 to 10 a.m. on the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy, and he's given me a space on my bingo board I did not expect today, which is a Nate Bjorkgren shout-out. What a time that was. KB, for Anthony Richardson and the narrative on the injuries that he's dealt with and him, not being able to stay healthy and all of that's followed him, that's caused people to overreact or react appropriately depending on the circumstance. does it take in your mind, and I get it, none of it, this is a semantics conversation. It has nothing to do with a bearing of his on-the-field performance. But in your mind, that shadow hanging over him about health status, does that go away with one complete season? Like if he plays 17 games next year, has no real injury hiccups, is that now safely to bed at that point?
Probably for some, and then if he were to get hurt in September of the third
Sure,
season, then it'll pop up again. I
Sure.
mean, that's. I would say that for just about any player. If you look at, I'm trying to use an example of like a Colts player. Okay, Ryan Kelly, for example. I think there's like this. I think Colts fans would label him like a little bit injury prone, or they like if I tweet out about Ryan Kelly, a lot of the responses tend to be like, he can't stay healthy, blah, blah, blah. And I want to say he's missed like 2 games in the last 2 years, something along those lines. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that's right. I mean, like 2 games in 2 years for an offensive lineman, it doesn't strike me as super injury prone. Like, yeah, I mean, that's not the end of the world. So I just think that's naturally how we view, some of these players. You could look at like, Julian Blackmon's career, I think follows like a little bit of a similar script, like that as well. There are probably some better examples of Colts players that are just kind of escaping me right now. So, yeah, Jimmy, I think, it's weird. If you look at like Josh Allen, to me, he's a reckless runner and he's never missed a game. It's like, how? I mean, how is that? When I watch Josh Allen play and there are 4 or 5 plays a game, I'm like, oh, yeah, he's hurt. And then I'm like, wait a minute, he just popped back up on that? Wait a minute, he's like trying to like get back to the huddle as soon as possible. And then I watch Richardson get hurt. I mean, Richardson got hit. Maybe you want to get technical in the injuries. The 4 dudes that tackled Anthony Richardson that led to the hits, 3 of them weighed less than 220 pounds. Like, we're talking DBs. It's not like 3, when Andrew Luck suffered the first big shoulder injury, that was 320-some pound Jarrell Casey landed on him. That's not what happened with Richardson on 3 of the 4 hits. Even the one that he, went out on for good, that was, Harold Landry, who's about the same size of him. So part of it is just, again, you look at Allen, you think how and why does he stay that healthy? And then you look at Lamar Jackson, and when he's had his 2 injury seasons, he's really only had 2. Those were, I think, kind of wear and tear, and then all of a sudden he got to December and he got hurt. Well, I mean, is he injury prone, or were just those the years that the September, October hits, added up, and all of a sudden in December it got to be too much? So
maybe it's the Madden rating.
The injury label.
Maybe it's just the Madden rating. Maybe it's just not high enough on the sustainability for.
Gosh, and I just wish, for everyone's sake, but especially Richardson, I just wish we could turn off injuries.
Hey, right here, I'm right there with you. You have my vote there, KB.
By the way, Kevin, with training camp coming up, we now know, I think the 25th is the first day of training camp, 24th or 25th. Are you going to maintain your ecological role of training camp of going around and picking up dog poo?
Well, I mean, I think to be technical, I don't know if we knew that was canine. I believe I called it crusty animal dung once I got a close-up view of it. Again, I thought, with the naked eye, it probably goes to show you why I wear glasses. I thought that it was some hardened grass clippings.
Yeah, for those that are unaware, this was last year we were doing the show. I think it was, shockingly our last week of doing the show together. And I said, I believe that's some sort of, animal deposit. And you said, no, that's grass. And then you got up, and I believe your direct word on the radio, which may not is, oh, yeah, that's definitely – did you say I don't remember what word you used. I don't know, but you confirmed that, yes, in fact, it was a deposit. And then we thought maybe coyote. Is that right?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, you could get, very zoology based in that part of Hamilton County. So I think it could have been a number of things. I know that farm butts right up to it, not to get too personal with those people, but you never know. If they could have, come over the fence. I believe at that point, too,
you think it was a protest?
In a Snuggie, right? You were in a Snuggie, if I'm not mistaken.
That was the coldest
that morning.
Do you remember? It was like it had to have been 55 degrees, and I had it wasn't a Snuggie. I had some sort of a throw blanket in my car. I have no idea why. And yes, I was mummifying myself. That is correct.
Right. Yeah, I always feel this way at times, like about again. the temperature-ridden days. Like when we get to 55 in March, I mean, we might as well walk around naked.
Oh,
I mean,
no
it's
question.
Like everyone's
It's all
wearing-
relative, yes.
We get to 55 in October, and it's like, put me in a hazmat suit. I don't even want to go outside. I mean, this is miserable there. And it was really one of the more pathetic attempts I had seen out of you. I got nervous there for a second.
You were
ill
playing
when
with
you-
poo, and you're getting mad at me for for mummifying myself. Come on now.
You went back to the car, if I'm not mistaken.
I did. I was miserable, but it was worth it to watch you playing with animal dung. All right, Kevin, big weekend on tap for you. You got a big weekend on tap here?
Not much, to be honest with you. I was just telling Eddie now I'll be on kid duty. I was out of town last weekend on a golf trip, so I need to act like I'm a decent parent. So I will try to attempt that here this weekend.
All right, well, enjoy it. We will be listening on Monday when you resume with, of course, Andy Sweeney, the wake-up call with KB and Andy, 7 o'clock on Monday, 7 to 10 each and every day. And then, of course, July 18th, if you want to see a state champion golfer, you can see Kevin, and then Andy will be there too for our annual golf outing at Back 9 on July the 18th. Kevin, appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
Gentlemen, have a great weekend. Thank you.
Kevin Bowen joining us on the CarX Tire and Auto guest line. We come back. It's a Friday. That means it's a feel-good Friday, and a feel-good story that actually is coming to Central Indiana, and one that was epicentered here. I'll explain both. Friday. Yesterday was absolutely beautiful outside. Is it nice outside right now? We're not near a window, but it was nice when I came in, but I think it's cloudy now, right? Somebody send me a text, 239-1070, and let me know what the weather's like outside.
I like how you ask us that when we're inside with you. Like, oh, Jake, actually, I think it is
You gave
cloudy.
the wrong number there, Jake.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I give the...
Yeah,
Sorry.
you can't text 317-239-1070.
523-9288. 523-9288. Send me a text. Let me know what the weather's like outside. That's a 317 area code, needless to say. 523-9288. It is a Friday, and I'm hoping that it's 84 and partly cloudy, according to my friend Mark. Matthew said it's gorgeous on the south side. Well, apparently there are clouds somewhere between the south and north.
Where's the wind coming in from?
Can we get a report on that? Now, how
What's
about
the
this?
humidity?
Now, this makes me nervous. It makes me nervous when I get a report here that it's gorgeous outside, but it's coming from one of my favorite teachers of all time, because then I think to myself, I have a level of professionalism that I have to uphold, because those that educated me as a younger person want to know that their work came to fruition.
Yeah.
So I have to, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I mentioned the other day, 1987, best year of my life. I read Watership Down. Boom. The person that had me reading it saying it's gorgeous outside. Now I'm nervous. Makes me nervous.
The little things sometimes.
But hello to Mr. Shadio. So, on a Feel Good Friday, which is what today is, brought to you by Franciscan Health, and I know, folks, I am aware of the fact, and I want to somewhat apologize, but I also feel an importance to it, and I'm greatly appreciative of the fact that Franciscan Health has partnered with me to allow and to facilitate for me to send this message, because I know I probably harp on it a lot, and I understand that, and I understand the redundancy of how it sounds. But if there is one person that is going to hear this that has not heard it before that can benefit from it, then that is the point of this segment, along with telling a feel-good story. But a lot of people ask me, as somebody who had a heart attack, what were the symptoms? And when I walked out of the hospital, and I'm very fortunate that I was only in the hospital for, I think, just under 40 hours. But I went from walking in with a 100% blockage of the main artery of my heart to getting a cath with a stent put in and opening my heart back up to going through a number of tests. And then obviously there was a long process after that of cardio rehab. But I was able to walk out of the hospital some 30 hours later, and it was a gorgeous, beautiful day. I remember that. It was in October of 2020, and it was beautiful outside. It was unseasonably warm out. And I knew when I walked out that I was given a chance, a second lease, if you will, and that part of that came the responsibility of trying to help other people be aware of and proactive about what I went through to make sure that they were on top of not having to go through it, because you do not want to go through it. But the good news is, with the advance of medicine and the great people at Franciscan Health, for example, if you do go through it, you can, in fact, survive and move on. For me, having a heart attack, and there are basically two ways that it can happen. You can have buildup or blockage within the arteries of your heart over the course of time due to circumstances that you are facilitating, a la smoking, improper diet, not enough exercise, those things, and that all the calcium and plaque buildup in your arteries can happen slowly over time. Or you can have a blockage, which is what I had, and that's not to say that I'm a perfect citizen by any stretch. But in my situation, what happened was I had a rogue piece of plaque that scraped the interior artery of my heart, and the blood then did its natural defense mechanism of clotting, or not defense mechanism, but its mechanism of clotting, and that clot then sealed off the artery, which caused me to have a heart attack. The symptoms that I felt were instantaneous. So I didn't have a slow buildup. Mine was an instant blockage, and I had on my left arm the feeling of like the tightest tourniquet that you've ever felt in your life sealing off my arm, and it was instant. It was not gradual. I knew exactly what it was as soon as it was happening, because it was unlike any sensation I'd ever had before. And then very shortly thereafter, it felt like warm water being poured into my sternum, followed by massive sweating. That was the worst case scenario. But if you are experiencing that, the thing that you want to make sure to do is call an ambulance immediately, because they can then call ahead to get the cath lab ready for you and begin giving you the blood thinners that are necessary to allow some trickle of blood through to your heart even if it's sealed off, which mine was. Again, fortunately, I was able to get to the hospital almost immediately, and they rushed me back once the cath lab was open, and I was able to get the help that was necessary. But if you want to get a scan of your heart, just $49 at Franciscan Health, franciscanhealth.org/screening bundles, or you can call 833-238-0688. That's 833-238-0688. Jake, I'm not going to remember that number. I understand that. You can simply Google Heart Scan Franciscan Health. This is affordable. It's just $49. It is non-invasive, and you can find out your health grade in doing that, and do so at the place that is #1 in Indiana for interventional coronary care and major cardiac surgery, according to CarChecks. Franciscan Health, absolutely outstanding when it comes, or CareChecks. I said CarChecks. CareChecks. Franciscan Health is outstanding. That's the bottom line when it comes to coronary and cardiovascular care. That's the place that you want to be, and I'm happy that they are partnering with me in this initiative. Now, in terms of each Friday, and sometimes they fall into our lap, I'm always welcome for people giving me stories in their community that are feel-good, maybe a local high school kid. We talked to Owen last week, who now has a mascot camp after being a mascot at Avon, allowed him to kind of come out of his shell after life wasn't so easy for him as a young guy. Those are the feel-good stories we're talking about. And then sometimes they're just delivered to us, like the story last night. I want you to think about a kid growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, born in the year 2000, living in Cleveland, like other kids, just trying to kind of make his way through school, likes to play sports, single mother with 6 siblings, 5 sisters and a brother, but a really good student and a really conscientious guy who likes to play a number of different sports. And he gets the opportunity growing up in Cleveland to go to college on an academic scholarship because he's been diligent about his schoolwork. And his friends say, you know what, you should go to college. You got a large family. You should go to college, pursue your dreams of working in communications. And so this young guy says, all right, I'll do that. Goes to Akron University on an academic scholarship. But, of course, if you're on an academic scholarship, it means that perhaps you're, I'm not going to say overachiever, but you're diligent and you're disciplined. And in that diligence and discipline, you go there and you're like, you know what? I was a first-team all-conference high school basketball player. I averaged 12 points a game in high school. I really like basketball. Akron's got a program. Maybe I can walk on at Akron. So he goes to Akron and says, you know what, can I walk on here and play basketball? And they go, sure. Yeah, we'll take walk-ons, especially with that academic record. Absolutely. So as a freshman, he plays in 7 games, scores a whopping 5 points, gets 1 shot from the floor, makes it, goes to the free throw line 4 times, makes 3 of them. There you go, 5 points as a freshman. Then a funny thing happens, and this happens to a lot of guys. He grows around the age of 19, goes through a growth spurt, a little bit late. All of a sudden, he's on campus walking around 6'7", 206 pounds, and becomes an integral part of the Akron Zips, and by the time it's all said and done, finishes as the all-time rebound leader, 2nd in blocks, 3rd in points in Zips history, right? And lo and behold, that's how it came to be that Enrique Freeman, a kid that simply used book work and discipline to get to college on an academic ride, ended up being an NBA draft pick of your Indiana Pacers, and becomes the first Akron basketball player selected in the first 2 rounds of the NBA draft, and is now a member of the Indiana Pacers simply by pursuing a dream that he never let go of, and doing the right things and impressing people and making sure that when his number was called, he was ready. And another good story that happened in Central Indiana with the draft is that of Zach Edey, of course. We know the story well. Grew up in Canada, played ice hockey, got to the point where they could no longer find skates that fit him. So he started going with other sports, became a guy at Purdue that was a bit of a project. Goes without saying, I don't need you to tell you the journey. But what I thought was super cool was that Zach Edey, who everybody knew was going to go in the first round of the draft, did he go into the green room? Did he go to Brooklyn and sit in the crowd and take the glitz and glamour and all of the strobe lights and camera lights and flash bulbs that go with being a first-round pick and hearing his name called? He did not. Instead, he gathered with his Purdue teammates that he enjoyed a Final Four run with and becoming the national runner-up, scoring 35 in the championship game. And when his number and his name was called, the first to stand up, turn around, and hug him, Mason Gillis, who, yes, might be transferring to Duke for his final year of eligibility, but is still a Boiler with the rest of that group. And the reason why Matt Painter's team has been able to do what they've been able to do, and the reason why Purdue is in the position they're in, is because that kind of teamwork, chemistry, and camaraderie and selflessness, that all of those guys were there to enjoy the moment with their teammate. Lessons to be had from both Enrique Freeman and from Zach Edey as well, in terms of the selflessness, the discipline, and the vision to move forward when it comes to your dream and being where you want to be. It's a lesson for a lot of young people out there, as a matter of fact, that you never know what can happen when you simply go about things by doing it the right way. And again, when it comes to making sure that you are taking care of not necessarily the discipline of your academics at this point in your life, but of your health, Franciscan Health is the place, franciscanhealth.org. $49 heart scan to make sure that you are proactive when it comes to your cardiovascular health. You do not want to go through. It would have been fun to play at Nolan Richardson's Arkansas Razorback program, but they called it 40 minutes of hell. Trust me, when it comes to a heart attack, you don't want to go through exactly that. I can promise you. We'll come back. We'll get Jimmy's plays of the day and hand it off to John next.
Of the day with an extended version of it. We'll get to that in a moment, but there's so much going on in the sports weekend that we'll start first with America's pastime, a little bit of baseball. We'll take the Toronto Blue Jays to win the money line tonight.
You know those Blue Jays are like really bad birds. Did you know that?
Are they?
Yeah, if you're a bird watcher and you got bird feeders and stuff, Blue Jays are like I'm trying to think of they're like the goons of the neighborhood. They come in, they're starting fights.
They ruffle some feathers, is what you're saying?
They do
Okay.
exactly
They're
that.
the
That is
bullies?
correct. They are bullies, yes.
Well,
they're like Omar on the wire.
They certainly bullied the New York Yankees last night. George Springer had not one but 2 3-run shots. I think it's more of the same. The Blue Jays take care of business tonight against the New York Yankees. That series ongoing in Toronto. Additionally, we'll take cute fella.
Hey, root for me.
The Baltimore Orioles to win the money line over the Texas Rangers.
Orioles not bad birds like Blue Jays. They're the nice fellas.
Very respected,
And they're
kind,
cute fellas, too. Look at the hat. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the hat.
They're definitively cute fellas. No arguments here. Eddie, baseball bets for you. We're gonna do it a little different today.
I've got 2. I'll take the Cincinnati Reds and the St. Louis Cardinals on the over 8.5. Frankie
Cardinals,
Montas.
smartest birds. Very knowledgeable. Appreciate and respect the game.
Frankie Montas on the mound, and he's not been good on the road for Cincinnati. And Andrew Palante, he's a bullpen guy, and that bullpen for St. Louis is taxed. So give me the over 8.5 there.
It's what?
Taxed. Tired.
Taxed, okay.
Yeah. And then I will take the Atlanta Braves minus 1.5.
Imagine if they're in California how taxed they'd be.
Against the Pittsburgh Pirates.
I love a good bullpen budget. It's one of my favorite graphics
like
in
that?
sport is a nice bullpen budget that breaks it all down for you right there. Plenty of soccer into the weekend. We'll start across the pond with the Euros. We are finally into the knockout rounds of the European Championship. No more group stages, no more points to be
Thank
had.
God.
It is win and move on. The action for the knockout rounds, the round of 16, begins Saturday at noon. We will take Italy to win on the money line over Switzerland. One thing when you're betting on soccer and knockout rounds, if you bet to win on the money line, it's only good for the 90 minutes of regulation. If it goes into overtime, your bet is a loss.
Is there a neutral zone in soccer?
No.
Okay, because Switzerland loves to hang out there.
We're also going to take Germany to win on the money line against Denmark. Those are all taking place on Saturday. Sunday, we'll take England's goal scorer being Phil Foden at plus 250 to be an anytime goal scorer.
Who's that again?
As Phil Foden, as the Three Lions take on Slovakia.
like Phil Foden? He's my favorite.
That Sunday at noon. I will not be here on Monday. While I'm sure that there will be no doubt fun adventures that I'll tell Jake I'm doing later in the show that he can then share with everybody. What I'll also be making time for is one of my family members who is originally from France. He's in town. France plays Belgium at noon. It's an opportunity to get to watch a knockout match with him. So I'll be watching that with him. And I will also take France to beat Belgium on Monday at noon. In that same match, I'll take Kylian Mbappe as an anytime goal scorer. We do have some Copa America action to get to as well.
How many wagers are you making?
It's an extended version since I'm not
Good
here on
Lord.
Monday. It's an extended version of the plays of the day. We'll take Uruguay to win on the money line over USA on Monday night. On Saturday, give me Lionel Messi as an anytime goal scorer. Those are your plays.
Do you have
of the
any
day.
money left?
I was getting
still
a
have some money
little
left.
worried.
I still
you
have a little
last
money left.
longer than
Hey,
usual.
listen,
28 wagers.
listen. You're usually doing 5 wagers on the plays of the day per day, and we have a Monday that I'm not here, so I want to make sure we group it in 9 wagers in total.
By the way, I wanted to, in a very smooth segue, I realized, but I wanted to update yesterday because I mentioned this, and I had worry that this was a story that is going to continue to be in the news, and it's very convoluted, I realize. But I mentioned yesterday the fact that former Indianapolis Colt Daniel Muir, he was a defensive tackle. I think he played 3 or 4 years here, was not a bad player, who now lives in Logansport on I don't know how to describe it, a large plot of land that initially was developed and started by a member of the Green Bay Packers in a group that they called the Servant Leaders Foundation. This is a religious organization, and I'm not going to get into nor interpretation of the validity of that statement or whatever else, other than to say that it is a group that lives in Logansport that I think that there has been concern by people that are close to those that have moved into that area. Robert Mathis, upon the end of his tenure with the Colts, was also, I don't know if he officially ever full-time moved to Logansport, but he was involved in a lot of the land purchase initially, and then I think kind of backed away from it. But the land in which this group lives, much of it, if I'm not mistaken, was purchased and then donated, quote unquote, by Robert Mathis to this organization. Muir and his wife, Kristen, their son, Bryson, who is, I believe, 14 years old, he was visiting his grandmother when his grandmother became concerned that he had become the victim on this property of domestic abuse. And apparently there was physical evidence that he had been abused in some way. Again, he is the alleged victim of domestic abuse. So the Indiana State Police, when she alerted them of her concern, went to the property to express their desire to talk to his parents, which include the former Indianapolis Colt, Daniel Muir. His parents did not respond to investigators at that time, nor has their son, who is 6'2" and 185 pounds, wearing an orange Under Armour shirt with blue jeans the last time that he was seen. They have not spoken to investigators nor turned over their son, who the police want to talk to, about whether or not he is an abuse victim. Today at 11 a.m., the Indiana State Police at the Peru, Indiana Post was informed that a meeting that had been agreed upon by Daniel Muir and his wife to meet with the state police at noon, at 11 a.m., they informed the police that they would be backing out of that agreement and that they are unwilling to cooperate. As a result, Bryson, now an alert has been sent out for him. He was last seen on June 16th with his mother when they were leaving his grandmother's house in the Cleveland area. His grandmother then called police, providing a photo of him with a black eye, saying that she believed that he was a victim of ongoing domestic abuse. The police pulled over his mother just a short time later, and he was not the young boy with him in the vehicle. So that is where things stand right now, but my concern is that this will be a story that will hopefully end peacefully, but will be an ongoing one that I think has a lot of different tentacles to it over the course of the weekend, but we certainly hope the best. But I wanted to update because I had mentioned it yesterday. John is on location. Eddie, he is where today?
He is at the Corner Bar off of Meridian in Epler in the Greenwood area.
Okay, so you got plenty of time to stop by, enjoy a cold one, enjoy what John has going on for the weekend. I'm sure it will be plenty of talk about the NBA draft. J&B will do that next. Jimmy is off. You said you're gone just Monday?
Just Monday.
Right,
I'll be back Tuesday, Wednesday as we have our shortened week with 4th of July anyway.
Are you going to Owen's mascot camp?
I'm not, actually.
Okay.
But that was another, good segment that we covered just last week. No, I'm not. Like I said, I'm going to watch some of that French match as France takes on Belgium with my cousin.
Have a waffle and a Belgian beer while
will.
Belgium and waffle watch. And too many beers, and you'll have to do exactly that. John's up next. We'll be back with you at noon. Thanks for listening to Aquarian Company.